Odin's lineage traces back to the primordial forces that shape the Norse cosmos, establishing him as a figure whose very blood carries the tension between order and chaos that defines the mythological universe. His father Bor emerged from the union of Buri, the first god licked from the primeval ice by the cosmic cow Audhumla, and represents the early divine generation that would establish the foundations of Asgard. This paternal line connects Odin directly to the creative forces that emerge from Ginnunga Gap, the primordial void that existed before creation. His mother Bestla presents a more complex heritage, as she belonged to the Jotnar, the race of giants who had become the eternal adversaries of the gods. Bestla was the daughter of Bolthorn, whose name translates roughly to evil thorn or baleful thorn, immediately establishing the dangerous and unpredictable nature of Odin's maternal inheritance. This giant blood flowing through Odin's veins proves crucial to understanding his character, as it grants him access to the ancient wisdom and primal magic that the giants possessed, knowledge that predated the ordered world of the gods. The marriage between Bor and Bestla represents one of the earliest alliances between the divine and giant realms, though such unions would become increasingly rare and fraught as cosmic tensions escalated. This mixed heritage manifests throughout Odin's actions and motivations. Unlike gods who represent pure divine order, Odin frequently employs cunning, deception, and morally ambiguous tactics that reflect his giant ancestry. His willingness to break oaths when necessary, his use of disguises to accomplish his goals, and his pursuit of knowledge regardless of the cost, all echo the chaotic and unpredictable nature associated with the Jotnar. Yet, simultaneously, his divine blood drives him to protect Midgard and maintain cosmic order, creating an internal tension that defines much of his mythological narrative. The multiplicity of names attributed to Odin reveals the various aspects of his complex nature and the different roles he fulfilled across Germanic and Scandinavian cultures. Woden, the earliest attested form of his name in Old High German and the root from which Wednesday derives, connects directly to the Proto-Germanic Wodanas, meaning Lord of Frenzy or Raging One. This etymology points to his association with ecstatic states, battle fury, and the divine madness that could possess warriors and poets alike. The concept of Wod encompasses not merely anger but a sacred frenzy that transcends normal human consciousness, linking Odin to shamanic practices and spiritual transformation. Grimnir, meaning the masked one or hooded one, reflects Odin's frequent use of disguises and his role as a wanderer who conceals his true identity. In the Grimnismal, he appears under this name while bound between fires in the hall of King Giroth, revealing cosmic secrets while maintaining his disguise until the final moment. This epithet emphasizes his function as a gatherer of intelligence and his willingness to endure hardship to acquire knowledge. The mask represents both literal disguise and metaphorical concealment of divine truth from mortals unprepared to comprehend it. Harbard, Greybeard or Hoary-beard, appears prominently in the Harbard Sljod, where Odin, disguised as a ferryman, engages in a flighting contest with Thor. This name emphasizes his appearance as an aged wanderer and connects to his role as a wise elder who has accumulated vast experience through his travels across the 9 worlds. The grey beard serves as a visual marker of wisdom earned through time and suffering, distinguishing him from younger, more impetuous deities. Gangleri, meaning wayweary or wanderer, appears in the Prose Edda when Odin visits the hall of the 3 mysterious figures high, just as high, and third to learn about the gods and cosmic order. This name captures his restless nature and insatiable curiosity that drives him to seek knowledge in the most unlikely places. The concept of being way-weary suggests not merely physical travel but spiritual exhaustion from the burden of cosmic responsibility and the weight of prophetic knowledge. These names represent only a fraction of Odin's epithets, which number over 200 in the surviving sources, Each name illuminates a different facet of his character: Ygg, Bolverka, Sidhotta, Glapsvita, and countless others. This proliferation of names reflects both the widespread worship of Odin across Germanic territories and the complex, often contradictory nature of his divine persona. Odin's dominion over wisdom stems from his relentless pursuit of knowledge, often at tremendous personal cost. His wisdom differs fundamentally from mere learning or scholarship. It encompasses cosmic understanding, prophetic insight, and the ability to perceive connections between seemingly unrelated events across time and space. This wisdom came through sacrifice and suffering rather than simple study. His hanging from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, represents the shamanic ordeal necessary to gain access to the runes and their associated magical knowledge. The connection between wisdom and war in Odin's character reflects the practical reality of Germanic society, where strategic thinking and battlefield cunning determine survival. Odin's wisdom manifests in his ability to orchestrate complex military campaigns, manipulate political situations, and inspire warriors to achieve impossible victories. His role as psychopomp, guiding the souls of fallen warriors to Valhalla, links his wisdom to understanding the mysteries of death and the afterlife. His association with death extends beyond merely collecting fallen warriors. Odin possesses intimate knowledge of the cosmic cycle of destruction and renewal that will culminate in Ragnarok. This prophetic understanding of universal doom drives many of his actions as he attempts to gather allies and resources for the final battle while simultaneously accepting its inevitable outcome. His wisdom includes the terrible knowledge that even gods must die, and that all his efforts may ultimately prove futile. Poetry and magic intertwine in Odin's character through the concept of Galder, the spoken magic that relies on rhythm, alliteration, and precise word choice to achieve supernatural effects. The theft of the Mead of Poetry from the giant Suttungr demonstrates how Odin acquired the ability to inspire poetic creation in mortals, but also reveals the deceptive methods he employed to obtain this power. The mead represents not merely artistic inspiration, but the fundamental creative force that shapes reality through language and song. Odin's mastery of Sida magic, traditionally associated with women and the Vanir gods, marks him as transgressive within his own cultural context. Seder involves divination, shape-shifting and manipulation of fate itself, practices that required the practitioner to adopt what Germanic society considered feminine roles. His willingness to learn these arts from Freyja demonstrates both his pragmatic approach to power and his disregard for conventional gender boundaries when cosmic necessity demands it. The physical descriptions of Odin in the Eddas emphasize his otherworldly nature while maintaining his recognizability as a wandering elder. His single eye, lost in exchange for wisdom from Mimir's well, serves as the most distinctive and symbolically significant aspect of his appearance. The empty socket represents the price of cosmic knowledge and suggests that true sight requires sacrifice of ordinary perception. Some sources describe the missing eye as continuing to see from the depths of Mimir's well, implying that Odin's vision extends beyond normal spatial and temporal boundaries. His remaining eye blazes within a fire, described in various sources as gleaming like a star or burning like flame. This luminous quality distinguishes him from mortal men and hints at the divine energy contained within his physical form. The eye's intensity reportedly makes it difficult for mortals to meet his gaze directly, creating an aura of supernatural authority that reinforces his divine status. Odin's hair and beard appear consistently grey or white in the sources, emphasizing his role as an ancient wisdom keeper rather than a youthful warrior god. The flowing beard reaches his chest and moves with his gestures, adding gravity to his pronouncements and contributing to his authoritative presence. His hair often appears unkempt, reflecting his role as a wanderer who prioritizes the acquisition of knowledge over personal grooming. His clothing varies depending on his purpose and disguise, but certain elements appear consistently. The broad-brimmed hat that shadows his face serves both practical and symbolic functions, concealing his distinctive features while representing his role as a traveller who observes from the margins of society. The wide cloak that wraps around his shoulders provides protection from weather while creating an imposing silhouette that can conceal weapons or magical implements. Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse, represents far more than mere transportation across the 9 worlds. Born from Loki's union with the giant stallion Svadilfari, Sleipnir embodies the shamanic tradition of the spirit horse that carries practitioners between different levels of reality. His 8 legs allow him to traverse not only physical space but also temporal boundaries, enabling Odin to move between past, present and future as his duties require. The horse's grey coloration matches Odin's own aged appearance, and his supernatural speed surpasses that of any normal steed. Sleipnir's ability to travel through air, over water, and beneath the earth makes him uniquely suited to Odin's role as a psychopomp and cosmic wanderer. The horse carries fallen heroes to Valhalla, bears Odin on his intelligence-gathering missions throughout the 9 worlds, and will transport him to the final battle of Ragnarok. The relationship between Odin and Sleipnir transcends that of rider and mount, representing a spiritual partnership between divine consciousness and the vehicle that enables transcendence of ordinary limitations. Gungnir, Odin's spear, carries significance that extends far beyond its function as a weapon. Forged by the dwarven sons of Ivaldi, the spear never misses its target and always returns to Odin's hand after being thrown. This reliability reflects Odin's role as the ultimate arbiter of victory in battle, as his decision to cast Gungnir over an army determines the outcome of conflicts before they begin. The spear's unerring accuracy symbolises divine justice and the inevitability of fate once cosmic forces have been set in motion. The runic inscriptions carved into Gungnir's shaft contain magical formulas that enhance its power and connect it to Odin's mastery of written magic. These runes represent the same cosmic knowledge that Odin gained through his ordeal on Yggdrasil, making the spear both a physical weapon and a repository of mystical wisdom. The spear serves as Odin's primary ritual implement, used to consecrate oaths, mark boundaries between sacred and profane space, and channel divine energy during magical workings. The cosmic drama that would establish Odin as the supreme architect of the 9 worlds began with the primordial giant Ymir, whose massive form contained within it the raw materials from which all existence would be fashioned. Ymir emerged from the melting ice of Niflheim as it met the fires of Muspelheim in the great void of Ginnunga Gap, fed by the milk of the cosmic cow Audhumla. As the first conscious being in the universe, Ymir represented pure creative potential, but also the chaotic, undifferentiated state that preceded organised reality. His body sweated forth the first frost giants while he slept, establishing the Jotun race that would become the eternal opponents of cosmic order. The decision to slay Ymir arose from the recognition that creation required the transformation of chaotic potential into structured reality. Odin, alongside his brothers Vili and Ve, understood that the giants' continued existence prevented the establishment of stable worlds where gods and mortals could dwell. The 3 brothers represented different aspects of divine consciousness. Odin embodied will and inspiration, Vili provided rational thought and intention, while Ve contributed the sacred power necessary to manifest their shared vision into physical reality. The actual slaying of Ymir required careful coordination between the 3 divine brothers, as the giant's immense size and primordial power made him nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. They struck simultaneously, with Odin's spear Gungnir piercing Ymir's heart, while his brothers delivered fatal wounds to other vital points. The giant's death released such torrents of blood that all the frost giants drowned except for Bergelmir and his wife, who escaped in a boat made from a hollowed tree trunk. This deluge of blood served as the first great catastrophe that would be echoed in the future flood that would precede Ragnarok. The transformation of Ymir's corpse into the cosmos required divine craftsmanship of unprecedented scope and precision. The brothers began with the giant's flesh, which they shaped and moulded into the earth itself, creating the land masses that would support mountains, forests, and human settlements. They carved valleys and plains from the softer tissues, while using the denser muscle and bone to form mountain ranges and rocky outcroppings. The process required not merely physical manipulation, but the infusion of divine consciousness into dead matter, awakening the earth to support life. Ymir's blood became the seas and lakes that would sustain all living creatures. The brothers channeled the flowing crimson streams into natural basins carved from the giant's flesh, creating interconnected waterways that would enable trade, travel, and the circulation of life-giving moisture throughout the world. The salt content of the seas derives from the minerals dissolved in the giant's blood, while the tidal movements reflect the continued circulation of Ymir's life force even after death. The giant's bones provided the framework for the world's geological structure. The brothers broke and arranged these massive skeletal elements to create the fundamental architecture that would support the Earth's surface. The largest bones became mountain ranges that stretched across continents, their peaks reaching toward the heavens while their roots extended deep into the underworld. Smaller bones formed hills and ridges that would channel water flow and provide natural boundaries between different regions. Ymir's skull presented the most challenging aspect of the cosmic construction project. The brothers lifted the enormous cranium high above the earth and positioned it to form the dome of the sky, supported at its four corners by four dwarves named Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, whose names correspond to the cardinal directions. These dwarven pillars ensure the stability of the heavens while maintaining the proper separation between the earthly realm and the cosmic void beyond. The giant's brains scattered throughout the sky dome became the clouds that would bring rain and snow to nourish the earth below. This transformation imbued the weather patterns with a form of consciousness, explaining the seemingly intelligent way that storms develop and move across the landscape. The clouds retain some memory of their origin in Ymir's thoughts, occasionally forming shapes that remind observers of faces or other meaningful forms. To provide illumination for their newly created world, the brothers gathered sparks and embers from Muspelheim and embedded them in the skull dome to serve as stars. They arranged these celestial fires in patterns that would guide travellers and mark the passage of seasons. The largest and brightest sparks became the sun and moon, which they set in motion across the sky to provide regular cycles of day and night. The sun travels in a chariot drawn by the horses Arvaka and Alsvidr, pursued eternally by the wolf skull, while the moon's chariot, pulled by Alsvidr, flees before the wolf Hati. The establishment of the cosmic tree Yggdrasil occurred simultaneously with the creation of the physical worlds, as the brothers recognized the need for a central axis that would connect all levels of existence. They planted the great ash tree at the center of their creation, its roots extending into the three wells that would become sources of wisdom, fate, and renewal. The tree's trunk provided the pathway between worlds, while its branches supported the heavens and sheltered the various realms from cosmic storms. Around Yggdrasil, the brothers arranged the 9 worlds in a complex 3-dimensional structure that reflected both practical necessities and symbolic relationships. Asgard occupied the highest position, connected to Midgard by the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, while the realm of the dead lay in the lowest regions. Each world received specific characteristics based on its intended inhabitants and their roles in the cosmic order. The creation of Ask and Embla marked Odin's most direct intervention in establishing mortal life on Midgard. While walking along a beach with his brothers, they discovered 2 tree trunks that had washed ashore, their wood weathered smooth by salt water and time. These pieces of driftwood, one ash and one elm, possessed the proper form and potential to house human consciousness, but lacked the divine spark necessary for true life. The three brothers each contributed essential elements to animate the wooden forms. Vili provided the gift of intelligence and memory, enabling the future humans to learn, reason, and pass knowledge to their descendants. V contributed physical senses and emotional capacity, allowing them to experience pleasure, pain, love, and sorrow that would motivate their actions and create meaningful relationships. Odin's contribution proved most crucial. He breathed into the wooden forms the gift of Ond, the divine breath that contains both life force and spiritual awareness. The Ond that Odin imparted to humanity represented more than simple animation. This divine breath carried within it a fragment of cosmic consciousness that would enable humans to perceive beauty, create art, compose poetry, and contemplate their place in the universal order. The spiritual component of Ond connected each human to the divine realm while maintaining their mortality, creating beings capable of heroic achievement but destined for eventual death. Ask and Embla awakened as fully formed adults, possessing innate knowledge of language, basic survival skills, and social customs necessary for establishing human civilization. Their names reflect their arboreal origins while symbolizing the complementary nature of masculine and feminine principles in human society. From their union would spring all the various tribes and nations that would populate Midgard, each carrying within their blood the divine gift that Odin had breathed into their first ancestors. The establishment of Asgard as the primary dwelling place of the Aesir required extensive planning and construction that showcased divine architectural abilities. Odin selected a location at the centre of the cosmic structure, elevated above the other worlds but connected to them through various pathways and bridges. The realm needed to serve simultaneously as a fortress against giant attacks, an administrative centre for governing the cosmos, and a cultural hub where gods could gather for councils and celebrations. The construction of Valhalla represented Odin's most ambitious architectural project, designed to house the Einherjar, who would fight beside the gods during Ragnarok. The Great Hall required dimensions unprecedented in any mortal construction, with 540 doors each, wide enough for 800 warriors to march through simultaneously. The roof consisted of golden shields that reflected sunlight during the day and glowed with their own inner fire during the night, creating a beacon visible from great distances across the cosmos. The walls of Valhalla rose from foundations of massive stone blocks quarried from the bones of ancient giants, their surfaces carved with intricate runic inscriptions that provided magical protection and enhanced the hall's structural integrity. Spear shafts served as rafters supporting the shield roof, while the benches where warriors would feast stretched for enormous distances, accommodated by the hall's supernatural ability to expand as needed to house the growing army of the dead. Within Valhalla, Odin established the complex systems necessary to maintain and train the Einherjar for their ultimate purpose. Each day, the chosen warriors engage in combat that hones their skills while allowing them to experience death and resurrection as preparation for the final battle. Their wounds heal completely each evening, ensuring that they can fight again the following day without carrying forward the accumulated damage of previous conflicts. The feasting arrangements in Valhalla reflect both the warriors' heroic status and their need for supernatural sustenance. The boar Sleipnir provides an endless supply of meat, as the creature regenerates completely each day after being slaughtered and cooked. The goat Heidrun supplies mead from her udders, producing enough of the intoxicating beverage to satisfy the enormous number of Einherjar while maintaining its magical properties that enhance courage and battle fury. Odin's role in organising the cosmic order extended far beyond the physical construction of realms and halls. He established the fundamental laws that would govern relationships between gods, giants and mortals, creating a system of obligations and prohibitions that would maintain stability while allowing for necessary change and growth. These cosmic laws operated through the principle of weird or fate, which bound even the gods to accept the consequences of their actions. The appointment of specific gods to oversee various aspects of existence required careful consideration of each deity's strengths, interests, and temperamental characteristics. Odin assigned Thor the responsibility of protecting Midgard from giant incursions, recognizing his son's exceptional strength and straightforward approach to problem-solving. Frigg received authority over marriage and domestic matters, while Freya governed aspects of love, fertility, and Saida magic that complemented her Vanir origins. The establishment of legal and social institutions among both gods and mortals required Odin's direct intervention and ongoing supervision. He created the concept of the Thing, the assembly where free men could gather to settle disputes, make laws, and conduct important community business. These gatherings operated under divine protection, with oath-breaking and violence during proceedings considered serious offences against cosmic order. Odin's organisation of the cosmic hierarchy established clear chains of command and responsibility that would prevent conflicts between different divine authorities. The system recognised the sovereignty of individual gods within their specific domains, while maintaining Odin's ultimate authority in matters affecting the stability of the entire cosmos. This arrangement required constant diplomatic effort to balance competing interests and resolve disputes between strong-willed divine personalities. The creation of the Wild Hunt as Odin's mobile court allowed him to maintain direct oversight of activities throughout the 9 worlds, while providing a dramatic display of divine power that would inspire appropriate respect and fear among mortals. The hunt consisted of Odin, mounted on Sleipnir, accompanied by fallen heroes, supernatural hounds, and various lesser divine beings, all moving at tremendous speed through the sky during storms and times of cosmic significance. The pursuit of ultimate knowledge drove Odin to contemplate an act of self-sacrifice that would transcend the boundaries of divine experience and grant him access to the deepest mysteries of existence. His extensive travels throughout the 9 worlds had revealed fragments of ancient wisdom, but the complete understanding of cosmic forces remained elusive, hidden within the very structure of reality itself. The shamanic traditions observed among mortal practitioners suggested that profound transformation required ritualized death and rebirth, a concept that resonated with Odin's understanding of the cyclical nature of existence and his own complex relationship with mortality. The decision to hang himself from Yggdrasil emerged from his recognition that the world tree served as more than merely a cosmic axis connecting the various realms. The great ash contained within its wood, bark and leaves the accumulated knowledge of all events that had occurred since the beginning of time, while its roots drew sustenance from wells that held the memories of past, present and future. To access this repository of universal wisdom required a sacrifice commensurate with the value of the knowledge sought, and Odin understood that nothing less than his own life would suffice as payment. The preparation for this ordeal involved extensive consultation with various sources of mystical knowledge, including the Volur who practiced Saida magic and the ancient giants who remembered the time before creation. These discussions revealed the specific requirements for a successful shamanic initiation. The candidate must experience genuine death while maintaining sufficient consciousness to perceive and retain the wisdom revealed during the liminal state between life and death. The ritual demanded complete isolation from all external assistance, as any intervention would invalidate the sacrifice and prevent the acquisition of the sought-after knowledge. Odin selected a particular branch of Yggdrasil that extended over a deep chasm, ensuring that his suspended body would hang freely without touching the ground or any other surface that might provide support or comfort. The branch itself bore scars from previous cosmic events, its bark marked by lightning strikes, and the claws of the various creatures that dwelled within the world tree's vast canopy. The selection of this specific location reflected both practical considerations and symbolic significance, as the chasm below represented the void of unknowing that he sought to illuminate through his sacrifice. The spear Gungnir served a dual purpose in the ritual, functioning both as the instrument of sacrifice and as a sacred implement that would consecrate the ordeal. Odin pierced his own side with the spear's point, the divine weapon's enchanted blade penetrating his flesh with surgical precision while avoiding immediately fatal damage to vital organs. The wound bled steadily throughout the 9-day ordeal, each drop of divine blood falling into the chasm below while carrying with it fragments of Odin's life force and spiritual essence. The physical positioning of his body during the hanging required careful attention to maintain the proper ritual stance while enduring the accumulated effects of pain, blood loss and exposure. Odin suspended himself head downward, his feet bound to the branch with cords woven from the hair of sacrificed horses, while his arms hung freely toward the abyss. This inverted posture, common in shamanic practices across various cultures, symbolized the reversal of normal consciousness and the deliberate cultivation of an altered state of awareness that would enable perception of hidden truths. The first day of the ordeal brought intense physical pain as his body adjusted to the unnatural position and the continuous bleeding from the spear wound. The blood flow gradually slowed as his divine physiology adapted to the injury, but the constant drain of vital essence created a progressive weakening that affected both his physical strength and mental clarity. The wind that perpetually blew through Yggdrasil's branches chilled his exposed flesh, while the tree's constant motion created a swaying that disoriented his spatial awareness and contributed to the developing trance state. As the second and third days passed, hunger and thirst began to affect Odin's consciousness in ways that differed significantly from normal mortal experience. His divine nature meant that he could survive far longer than any human without sustenance, but the combination of blood loss, exposure, and the spiritual demands of the ritual created a unique form of suffering that transcended purely physical discomfort. The absence of food and water forced his consciousness to turn inward, beginning the process of separation from ordinary sensory perception that would enable access to deeper levels of reality. The shamanic dimensions of Odin's ordeal reflected practices that had developed among Germanic peoples over millennia, drawing upon traditions that connected earthly practitioners with divine forces through ritualized suffering and symbolic death. The hanging specifically echoed the sacrificial customs associated with Odin's own worship, where victims were suspended from trees as offerings to gain the god's favour in battle or to obtain prophetic knowledge. By subjecting himself to the same treatment that his worshippers inflicted upon sacrificial victims, Odin demonstrated the principle that divine power required proportional sacrifice from those who sought to wield it. The 9-day duration of the hanging corresponded to significant numerical symbolism within Norse cosmology, where 9 represented completion and cosmic totality. The 9 worlds themselves reflected this pattern, as did the 9 nights that Odin would later spend with Gunnlod to obtain the Mead of Poetry. The number's association with feminine reproductive cycles and the gestation period required for spiritual rebirth added another layer of meaning to the ritual's duration, suggesting that Odin's transformation paralleled the process of birth in its requirement for a specific temporal framework. The initiatory aspects of the ordeal involved the systematic dissolution of Odin's ordinary consciousness and its reconstruction around new principles of understanding. The progressive weakening of his physical body created corresponding changes in his mental state, as the boundaries between self and cosmos began to blur under the influence of pain, hunger, and spiritual exertion. The familiar landmarks of divine identity gradually faded as he entered deeper levels of trance, leaving behind the comfortable certainties of his previous existence to explore realms of knowledge that existed beyond the reach of normal consciousness. The shamanic tradition of the spirit journey manifested during Odin's hanging as his consciousness separated from his suspended body and began to explore dimensions of reality normally hidden from divine perception. These out-of-body experiences carried him through various levels of existence, from the deepest roots of Yggdrasil to the highest branches that touch the cosmic void. Each realm revealed different aspects of universal truth. building toward a comprehensive understanding of the forces that shaped reality at its most fundamental level. The discovery of the runes occurred during the climactic moment of the ordeal, when Odin's consciousness reached its furthest extension from his physical body and achieved direct contact with the primal forces of creation. The runes appeared not as carved symbols, but as living entities of pure meaning, each one embodying a specific aspect of cosmic law or natural force. Their forms crystallized in his perception as geometric patterns that captured the essential structure of reality, providing a symbolic system capable of representing and manipulating the fundamental elements of existence. The first rune to reveal itself carried the meaning of cattle or wealth, representing the material abundance that flows from proper understanding and application of cosmic principles. Its angular form suggested the horns of aurochs while simultaneously evoking the concept of enclosure and containment that enables the accumulation and preservation of resources. The rune's appearance marked the beginning of Odin's comprehension of how symbolic representation could serve as a bridge between abstract concepts and practical application. Subsequent runes manifested in rapid succession, each one adding new dimensions to Odin's growing understanding of the symbolic system's scope and power. The rune representing the giant or unknown revealed the forces of chaos and destruction that constantly threatened cosmic order, while its counterpart, symbolizing the god or divine gift, demonstrated the principles of protection and beneficent intervention. The interplay between these opposing forces became clear as Odin perceived how their dynamic tension created the conditions necessary for growth, change, and renewal. The runes associated with natural elements provided insight into the fundamental building blocks of physical reality. Fire, ice, earth, and air each possessed its own runic representation that captured both the element's essential characteristics and its potential for transformation when combined with other forces. The fire rune blazed within a light that suggested both creative and destructive potential, while the ice rune's crystalline structure revealed the principle of preservation and the power of stillness to maintain form against entropy. The significance of the runes as tools of magic became apparent as Odin recognized their capacity to serve as focal points for directing divine will into practical manifestation. Each rune functioned as a condensed formula that contained within its simple form the power to influence specific aspects of reality when properly activated through ritual action, spoken incantation, or meditative contemplation. The combination of multiple runes created complex spells capable of achieving effects that transcended the sum of their individual powers. The divinatory applications of the runic system revealed themselves as Odin perceived how the symbols could serve as windows into the hidden patterns that shaped past, present, and future events. The runes existed simultaneously in all temporal states, their meanings shifting and evolving based on their relationships with other symbols and the specific questions posed by the diviner. This temporal fluidity made them ideal instruments for exploring the web of weird that connected all events across time and space. The cosmic knowledge embedded within the runic system encompassed understanding of the fundamental laws that governed existence at every level, from the behavior of subatomic particles to the movements of celestial bodies. Each rune represented a different aspect of universal law, providing a comprehensive framework for comprehending how seemingly disparate phenomena operated according to consistent underlying principles. The mastery of this knowledge would enable Odin to predict and influence events throughout the 9 worlds with unprecedented precision. The paradox of Odin sacrificing himself to himself emerged as one of the most profound theological implications of the hanging ordeal. The ritual required both a sacrificer and a sacrificial victim, roles that Odin fulfilled simultaneously through his dual nature as both divine being and cosmic principle. His individual personality served as the offering, while his universal aspect as the embodiment of wisdom and magic received the sacrifice and granted the requested knowledge in return. This self-sacrificial dynamic reflected the fundamental principle of reciprocity that governed all magical operations within Norse cosmology. No power could be gained without equivalent payment, and no knowledge could be acquired without corresponding sacrifice of something of equal value. By offering his own life as payment for ultimate wisdom, Odin demonstrated his willingness to risk everything in pursuit of the cosmic understanding necessary to fulfill his responsibilities as ruler of the gods. The theological implications extended beyond simple transaction to encompass questions of divine identity and the nature of consciousness itself. The ordeal revealed that even the gods existed as part of a larger cosmic system that operated according to impersonal laws of cause and effect. Odin's ability to sacrifice himself to himself suggested that divine consciousness possessed multiple levels or aspects that could interact with each other as separate entities while remaining fundamentally unified. The completion of the 9-day ordeal marked not an ending but a transformation that would reshape Odin's understanding of his role within the cosmic order. The knowledge gained through his sacrifice would prove essential for the challenges that lay ahead, particularly the growing threat of Ragnarok and the need to prepare for the final battle that would determine the fate of gods and mortals alike. The runes would serve as his primary tools for gathering intelligence, manipulating events, and maintaining the delicate balance between order and chaos that preserved the stability of existence. The acquisition of runic wisdom through his self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil had fundamentally transformed Odin's understanding of cosmic forces, yet the Allfather recognized that complete mastery over the mysteries of existence required access to another form of divine knowledge, the power of inspired speech that could shape reality through carefully crafted words. This realization emerged from his observations of how certain mortals possessed the ability to compose verses that transcended mere entertainment, creating poetry that could influence the emotions and actions of listeners with supernatural effectiveness. The source of this poetic inspiration remained hidden, but Odin's enhanced perception following his runic initiation allowed him to trace its origins to a legendary substance known as the Mead of Poetry, whose creation involved a complex series of events that had begun with the conclusion of the devastating war between the Aesir and Vanir. The Aesir-Vanir War had erupted from fundamental disagreements about the proper relationship between divine and mortal realms, with the Vanir advocating for closer integration and mutual benefit, while the Aesir maintained that clear hierarchical distinctions served the cosmic order more effectively. The conflict escalated when Gullveig, a Vanir practitioner of cedar magic, arrived in Asgard and began teaching the Aesir techniques for manipulating fate and fortune through ritual practices that challenged traditional gender roles and divine authority structures. Her influence grew rapidly among certain members of the Aesir court, creating factional divisions that threatened the stability of divine governance. The Aesir's initial response involved attempting to destroy Gullveig through repeated executions, burning her alive 3 times in their great hall, while she continued to return to life with her knowledge and power intact. These failed attempts at elimination demonstrated the fundamental differences between Aesir and Vanir approaches to magic and divine authority, as the Vanir goddess possessed regenerative abilities that transcended the Aesir's understanding of death and resurrection. The public nature of these executions created a diplomatic crisis that made peaceful resolution increasingly difficult to achieve. The Vanir's declaration of war followed swiftly after news of Gullveig's treatment reached their realm, as they interpreted the repeated executions as deliberate insults to their divine dignity and threats to their fundamental magical practices. The Vanir possessed military capabilities that complemented their magical expertise, with their forces including both divine warriors and mortal allies who had benefited from Vanir agricultural and fertility magic. Their initial attacks targeted Aesir outposts and allies throughout the 9 worlds, demonstrating tactical sophistication that caught the Aesir leadership unprepared for sustained conflict. The war's progression revealed the limitations of both divine factions when forced to confront opponents who possessed comparable power but fundamentally different approaches to wielding divine authority. The Aesir's superior numbers and conventional military organisation proved less effective against Vanir forces that employed guerrilla tactics, magical deception, and the ability to manipulate natural forces to create battlefield advantages. Conversely, the Vanir discovered that their magical superiority could not overcome the Aesir's control over key strategic resources and their alliances with giant factions that provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements. The conflict's resolution required diplomatic negotiations that acknowledged the strengths and legitimacy of both divine factions while creating mechanisms for preventing future hostilities. The peace treaty established formal procedures for exchanging hostages who would serve as permanent ambassadors between the two realms, ensuring ongoing communication and mutual understanding of each faction's interests and concerns. The Vanir sent Njordr and his children Freyr and Freyja to live among the Aesir, while the Aesir dispatched Hörnir and Mimir to represent their interests in Vanaheim. The symbolic ratification of the peace treaty involved a unique ritual that would have profound consequences for the subsequent creation of the Mead of Poetry. Both divine factions gathered at a neutral location where they collectively expectorated into a large ceremonial vessel, mixing their divine saliva to create a physical representation of their unified commitment to maintaining peaceful relations. This mingled fluid contained the essence of both Aesir and Vanir wisdom, combining the practical knowledge and martial expertise of one faction with the magical insight and natural understanding of the other. From this mixture of divine saliva, the gods shaped the form of Kvasir, whose name derived from the fermented beverage kvass, and immediately suggested his connection to intoxication and altered states of consciousness. The newly created being possessed unprecedented wisdom that encompassed both Aesir and Vanir traditions, making him capable of answering any question posed to him and providing counsel that could resolve even the most complex disputes. His knowledge extended beyond mere factual information to include deep understanding of human nature, cosmic principles, and the subtle relationships between seemingly unrelated phenomena. Kvasir's physical appearance reflected his unique origins and extraordinary wisdom. He possessed the stature of a normal man, but with features that suggested both divine heritage and scholarly contemplation. His eyes held depths that seemed to contain vast libraries of accumulated knowledge, while his voice carried harmonics that made his words particularly memorable and persuasive. The combination of his appearance and manner created an immediate impression of trustworthiness and authority that made both gods and mortals eager to seek his guidance on important matters. The newly created sage embarked on extensive travels throughout the 9 worlds, sharing his wisdom freely with all who sought his counsel, regardless of their social status or divine allegiance. His reputation for fairness and insight grew rapidly, as he resolved disputes that had persisted for generations and provided advice that consistently produced beneficial outcomes for those who followed it. The breadth of his knowledge encompassed practical matters such as agriculture and craftsmanship, as well as abstract philosophical questions about the nature of existence and moral responsibility. Kvasir's generous sharing of wisdom attracted the attention of 2 dwarfs named Fjalar and Galar, whose names suggested their association with deception and cunning, rather than the honest craftsmanship typically associated with their people. These brothers possessed considerable skill in brewing and fermentation, but their primary motivation involved acquiring knowledge and power for personal gain, rather than benefiting their community or honouring the cosmic order. They recognized that Kvasir's wisdom represented an unprecedented opportunity to advance their own status and influence if they could find a way to monopolize access to his knowledge. The dwarf's initial approach involved inviting Kvasir to visit their remote dwelling under the pretense of seeking his guidance on important matters that required privacy and discretion. They prepared an elaborate feast in his honor and presented themselves as humble craftsmen who needed assistance with complex technical problems related to their brewing operations. Kvasir's generous nature and commitment to helping all who sought his aid made him receptive to their invitation, despite subtle warning signs that suggested their motivations might not be entirely pure. The murder of Kvasir occurred during what appeared to be a friendly consultation about brewing techniques, with the dwarf striking him down when his attention was focused on examining their equipment and explaining the principles behind fermentation processes. They killed him swiftly and efficiently, using tools designed for butchering rather than weapons of war, suggesting that they had planned the murder carefully and viewed it as a necessary step in their larger scheme, rather than an act of passion or sudden opportunity. The dwarf's subsequent actions reveal the calculated nature of their crime and their sophisticated understanding of how to preserve and concentrate Kvasir's wisdom for their own use. They collected his blood in 3 containers, 2 vats named Son and Bodden, and a kettle called Odroiria, whose name meant stirrer of inspiration, and indicated their awareness of the blood's potential for creating poetic and prophetic abilities. The careful preservation of every drop demonstrated their understanding that Kvasir's wisdom resided not merely in his consciousness, but in the physical substance of his divine essence. The brewing process that transformed Kvasir's blood into the Mead of Poetry required the addition of honey and other ingredients that would ferment the mixture while preserving its magical properties. The dwarves possessed ancient knowledge of fermentation techniques that could maintain the spiritual essence of organic materials while transforming their physical properties, skills that they had developed through generations of crafting magical implements and substances for various divine and mortal clients. The fermentation period lasted for specific lunar cycles that aligned with cosmic forces governing transformation and the enhancement of consciousness. The completed mead possessed properties that transcended ordinary alcoholic beverages, containing within its golden substance the concentrated wisdom and eloquence that had made Kvasir renowned throughout the 9 worlds. Anyone who drank even small quantities of the mead would gain temporary access to extraordinary poetic abilities, finding themselves capable of composing verses that could move listeners to laughter, tears, or action with supernatural effectiveness. The mead also granted prophetic insights and the ability to perceive hidden connections between events across time and space. The dwarfs' plan to monopolize the mead's power eventually led to their downfall when they murdered the giant Gilling and his wife, during a subsequent scheme to acquire additional magical resources. Their victim son Suttungr discovered the crimes and captured the murderous brothers, threatening to execute them unless they provided adequate compensation for his parents' deaths. The dwarfs offered the Mead of Poetry as weregild, transferring ownership of the precious substance to the giant as payment for their crimes. Suttungr transported the mead to his stronghold in Jotunheim, where he concealed it within a mountain chamber, accessible only through a narrow opening that could be sealed with massive stone blocks. He assigned his daughter Gunnlod the responsibility of guarding the mead, recognizing that her combination of giant strength and feminine intuition would make her an effective protector against potential thieves. The chamber's location deep within the mountain provided additional security, as any intruder would need to navigate treacherous passages and overcome multiple obstacles to reach the hidden treasure. Odin's discovery of the mead's location required extensive intelligence gathering that drew upon his network of ravens, wolves, and other creatures capable of travelling undetected through giant territory. Huginn and Muninn provided crucial reconnaissance information about Suttungr's stronghold and the security measures protecting the mead, while various shapeshifters in Odin's service infiltrated the giant's household to gather details about daily routines and potential vulnerabilities. The accumulation of this intelligence revealed both the challenges involved in acquiring the mead and the specific opportunities that might enable a successful theft. The complexity of the theft required Odin to develop a multi-stage plan that would enable him to gain access to Gunnlod, while avoiding direct confrontation with Suttungr's formidable defences. The scheme began with Odin's transformation into a labourer named Bolverkr, whose name meant evil worker, and suggested the deceptive nature of his intentions while maintaining plausible cover for his presence in giant territory. This disguise required careful attention to details of appearance, speech, and behaviour that would convince giants of his authenticity while concealing his divine nature and true purpose. Bolverk's arrival at the farm belonging to Suttungur's brother Baugi coincided with the harvest season, when additional labourers were desperately needed to complete essential agricultural work before winter weather made further efforts impossible. The disguised Odin presented himself as an experienced worker whose previous employer had died unexpectedly, leaving him in need of immediate employment to survive the coming cold season. His knowledge of farming techniques and willingness to accept difficult working conditions made him as an attractive hire despite the late timing of his arrival. The supernatural effectiveness of Bolverk's work gradually became apparent as he consistently outperformed the other labourers while maintaining an appearance of normal human capability. His divine strength and endurance enabled him to accomplish tasks that would normally require multiple workers, but he carefully modulated his performance to avoid arousing suspicion about his true nature. The other workers began to resent his superior productivity, creating tensions that Odin deliberately encouraged to advance his larger plan. The murder of Baugi's labourers occurred when Odin used his magical abilities to incite a violent confrontation, during which they killed each other with their farming tools. He accomplished this manipulation through subtle influences on their emotions and perceptions, making each worker believe that the others were plotting against him and threatening his survival through the winter. The resulting massacre eliminated all of Baugi's experienced help while positioning Bolverkr as the only available replacement capable of completing the essential harvest work. Baugi's desperate situation following the loss of his workforce created the leverage that Odin needed to negotiate access to his brother's stronghold. The giant faced the prospect of losing his entire harvest unless he could find adequate replacement labour, but the late season and remote location of his farm made it unlikely that other workers could be found in time. Bolverkr's offer to complete all the necessary work single-handedly in exchange for specific compensation provided an attractive solution to an otherwise impossible problem. The terms of their agreement specified that Bolverkr would receive 1 drink of Suttungur's mead as payment for completing the harvest work that would normally require 9 men throughout the entire season. Baugi initially resisted this demand, recognising that his brother jealously guarded the mead and had never permitted anyone outside his immediate family to taste it. However, the prospect of complete crop failure and the resulting starvation during the winter months eventually convinced him to accept the bargain, though he warned that obtaining Suttungur's consent would require considerable diplomatic effort. The completion of the harvest work demonstrated Odin's divine capabilities while maintaining his disguise as an exceptionally capable mortal labourer. He worked continuously throughout the day and night, requiring no rest or sustenance while accomplishing tasks with supernatural speed and precision. The quality of his work exceeded anything that Baugi had previously seen, as Bolverkr's divine knowledge of agriculture enabled him to optimize every aspect of the harvest process while avoiding the waste and inefficiency that typically characterized mortal farming operations. Baugi's attempt to fulfill his part of the bargain revealed the extent of Suttungur's possessiveness regarding the mead and his unwillingness to share it with anyone regardless of the circumstances. The giant lord refused to permit even a single sip of the precious substance, arguing that its power was too dangerous to entrust to mortals, and that any distribution would diminish its effectiveness for his own use. This refusal created a dilemma for Baugi, who had given his word but lacked the authority or power to compel his brother's compliance. The alternative plan that Odin proposed required Baugi's assistance in gaining physical access to the mountain chamber where the mead was stored, bypassing Suttungur's authority through stealth rather than negotiation. Bolverkr suggested that they could drill through the mountain from an external location, creating a passage that would enable him to reach the mead without alerting the guards or triggering the defensive measures protecting the main entrance. This approach would technically fulfill Baugi's obligation, while avoiding direct confrontation with Suttung's prohibition. The drilling operation began at a location on the mountain's exterior that Odin had identified through his reconnaissance as offering the most direct route to the hidden chamber. Baugi provided the Augurati, whose name suggested its exceptional boring capabilities, while Bolverker supplied the supernatural strength necessary to drive the tool through solid rock. The work proceeded slowly and carefully to avoid creating noise or vibrations that might alert Suttung's guards to their activities. Baugi's attempt at deception during the drilling process revealed his continued ambivalence about the entire enterprise and his fear of his brother's potential retaliation. When the passage neared completion, the giant claimed that they had broken through to the chamber and invited Bolverkir to enter, hoping that the mortal would discover the deception and abandon the attempt. However, Odin's divine senses detected that stone chips continued to fall when he blew into the passage, indicating that Baugi had lied about reaching their destination. The successful completion of the passage required additional drilling that finally broke through into the chamber where Gunnlod maintained her vigilant guard over the mead. The opening was barely large enough to accommodate a human form, requiring Odin to transform into a serpent to navigate the narrow tunnel and emerge within the mountain's hidden interior. This shape-shifting demonstrated his mastery of the magical arts acquired through his various ordeals and training, while the serpent form provided symbolic resonance with themes of wisdom and transformation. Gunnlod's initial reaction to the intruder's appearance combined surprise, suspicion, and curiosity about how anyone had managed to penetrate her father's supposedly impregnable defences. The giant maiden possessed formidable physical strength and had been trained in combat techniques that would enable her to defend the mead against most potential threats. However, Odin's immediate transformation back into human form and his courteous manner of address suggested that he posed no immediate physical danger and might warrant conversation before violent action. The seduction of Gunnlod required Odin to employ all his skills in persuasion, deception, and emotional manipulation, while maintaining the delicate balance necessary to achieve his goals without provoking her into destroying the mead or summoning assistance. He presented himself as a wandering scholar whose quest for knowledge had led him to seek the legendary mead, despite the dangers involved in reaching it. His extensive knowledge of poetry, history, and cosmic mysteries provided compelling evidence of his scholarly credentials while demonstrating the depth of wisdom that made him worthy of tasting the precious substance. The 3 days that Odin spent with Gunnlod in the mountain chamber represented a complex interplay of genuine attraction, calculated manipulation, and mutual recognition of each other's exceptional qualities. The giant maiden possessed intelligence and cultural sophistication that matched her physical beauty, making her a worthy companion for someone of Odin's intellectual caliber. Their conversations ranged across topics including poetry, philosophy, and the nature of wisdom itself, creating an atmosphere of intimate intellectual communion that enhanced the physical attraction between them. Gunnlod's growing affection for her mysterious visitor gradually overcame her sense of duty as guardian of the mead, particularly as Odin's demonstrations of poetic skill and cosmic knowledge convinced her that he represented the type of worthy recipient for whom the mead had originally been intended. She began to view her father's hoarding of the substance as a betrayal of its true purpose, which was to inspire great poetry and wisdom, rather than serve as a mere treasure to be jealously guarded. This philosophical shift provided the emotional justification she needed to consider sharing the mead with someone who would use it appropriately. The negotiation over access to the mead involved careful discussion of how much Odin would be permitted to drink and what he would provide in return for this unprecedented privilege. Gunnlod initially offered small tastes that would provide temporary inspiration without significantly depleting her father's treasure. But Odin's persuasive arguments about the mead's intended purpose gradually convinced her to authorize larger quantities. His promise to compose poems celebrating her beauty and wisdom provided additional incentive for her cooperation, as she recognized the value of having her name preserved in verses that would be remembered throughout the ages. The consumption of the mead occurred over the 3-day period in carefully measured portions that allowed Odin to absorb its full power, while avoiding the potentially dangerous effects of consuming too much of the potent substance at once. Each drink enhanced his poetic abilities exponentially, granting him access to forms of expression and levels of inspiration that transcended anything he'd previously experienced. This mead's effects extended beyond simple artistic enhancement to include prophetic visions and deeper understanding of the cosmic forces that shaped reality at its most fundamental level. The complete consumption of the mead's contents represented a betrayal of Gunnlod's trust that Odin justified through his understanding of cosmic necessity and the greater good that would result from making the substance available to worthy mortals. He drank the entire contents of all 3 containers, absorbing not merely the mead itself, but the concentrated wisdom and eloquence that it contained. This theft would provide him with the power to inspire poets throughout the mortal world, while establishing his authority as the divine patron of skaldic composition. The transformation into an eagle for his escape required precise timing to avoid Suttung's pursuit, while carrying the precious cargo safely back to Asgard. Odin's mastery of shape-shifting enabled him to assume the form of a magnificent bird of prey, whose powerful wings could carry him swiftly across vast distances, while his keen eyesight would enable him to navigate safely through any obstacles or threats encountered during the journey. The eagle form also provided symbolic appropriateness, as these birds were traditionally associated with divine messengers and the acquisition of wisdom through soaring observation of earthly events. Suttung's pursuit in his own eagle form created a dramatic aerial chase that tested both Giant's shape-shifting abilities and flying skills across the skies above Jotunheim and the intervening territories leading to Asgard. The Giant's larger size provided advantages in terms of raw speed and power, but Odin's superior magical knowledge enabled him to employ various tactics, including wind manipulation and illusion, to maintain his lead despite the formidable pursuit. The chase became a contest of endurance as much as speed, with both participants pushing their transformed bodies to their absolute limits. The approach to Asgard's boundaries created additional urgency as Odin realized that Suttung's pursuit would not end simply because they had reached Aesir territory. The giant's rage over the theft and his daughter's betrayal provided sufficient motivation for him to risk direct confrontation with the assembled gods in order to recover his stolen treasure. This prospect required Odin to signal his allies to prepare defensive measures while simultaneously maintaining his flight speed and protecting the mead from any spillage that might occur during evasive maneuvers. The gods' preparation of containers to receive the mead demonstrated their advanced knowledge of Odin's plan and their readiness to assist in preserving the stolen treasure for its intended purpose. They arranged numerous vessels throughout Asgard's courtyards and halls, recognizing that the transfer of the mead from Odin's transformed body to secure storage would need to occur quickly and efficiently to prevent loss of the precious substance. The variety of container sizes and locations ensured that the mead could be distributed appropriately regardless of exactly where or how Odin would need to disgorge it upon his arrival. The regurgitation of the mead occurred in multiple locations as Odin flew over Asgard, releasing portions of the precious liquid into the prepared containers, while maintaining sufficient reserves to complete his flight to the most secure storage location. The process required careful control to ensure that the mead maintained its magical properties while being transferred from his eagle form to permanent storage without losing any of its transformative power. The successful completion of this process marked the culmination of one of the most complex and dangerous thefts in Norse mythology, establishing Odin's reputation as a master of cunning and deception while providing him with the means to inspire mortal poets throughout the ages. The ravens Huginn and Muninn served as extensions of Odin's consciousness across the vast expanse of the Nine Worlds. their daily flights providing him with intelligence that no single divine being could gather through personal observation alone. These magnificent blackbirds possessed supernatural abilities that transcended those of ordinary corvids, including enhanced speed that enabled them to traverse enormous distances within a single day, telepathic communication with their master that functioned across any separation, and cognitive capabilities that allowed them to understand and remember complex information with perfect accuracy. Their names, meaning thought and memory respectively, reflected their fundamental roles in Odin's information-gathering network and his own mental processes. Huginn's primary function involved the collection of immediate intelligence about current events throughout the realms, observing ongoing activities and gathering fresh information about political developments, military movements, and supernatural phenomena that might affect cosmic stability. His acute perception enabled him to detect subtle changes in behaviour patterns, identify emerging threats before they fully manifested, and recognise opportunities that Odin could exploit to advance his strategic objectives. The Raven's ability to understand human and giant languages allowed him to eavesdrop on conversations that revealed hidden motivations and secret plans that would otherwise remain concealed from divine observation. Muninn's complementary role focused on the preservation and analysis of historical information, maintaining detailed records of past events and their consequences, while identifying patterns that could inform future decision-making. His exceptional memory retained not merely factual details, but also the emotional contexts and cultural significance of observed events, providing Odin with comprehensive understanding of how different peoples and individuals had responded to various challenges throughout history. This accumulated knowledge enabled Odin to predict likely reactions to his own actions and develop strategies that accounted for the complex web of relationships and obligations that connected various factions throughout the cosmos. The Raven's physical appearance reflected their supernatural nature, while maintaining enough similarity to ordinary birds to enable them to operate without attracting undue attention during their reconnaissance missions. Their feathers possessed a lustrous black coloration that seemed to absorb light rather than merely reflecting it, creating an almost void-like appearance that made them difficult to track visually against dark backgrounds. Their eyes blazed with intelligence that clearly distinguished them from normal corvids, displaying an awareness and purposefulness that immediately marked them as creatures of divine origin to any observer capable of recognizing such distinctions. Their size exceeded that of typical ravens by a considerable margin, with wingspans that enabled them to carry small objects over long distances while maintaining their exceptional flight speed. Their talons possessed unusual strength and dexterity that allowed them to manipulate complex mechanisms and carry written messages when circumstances required such capabilities. The ravens' voices could produce not only the harsh cries typical of their species, but also articulate speech in multiple languages, though they typically reserved this ability for communications with Odin and other divine beings who understood their true nature. The daily routine of Huginn and Muninn began before dawn as they departed from Asgard to begin their systematic survey of activities throughout the 9 worlds. Their flight paths varied according to Odin's specific intelligence requirements and current areas of concern, but typically included visits to all major population centres and strategic locations where significant events were likely to occur. The ravens possessed the ability to divide their attention between multiple simultaneous observations, enabling them to monitor several different situations during the same time period while maintaining accurate records of each separate investigation. Their method of information gathering involved both direct observation and interaction with local informants who had been cultivated over extended periods to provide reliable intelligence about regional developments. These informant networks included humans who served Odin through religious devotion, supernatural creatures who owed him favours or feared his retribution, and even hostile entities who could be manipulated into revealing useful information without realising the ultimate destination of their disclosures. The ravens' ability to appear as ordinary birds enabled them to approach these sources without arousing suspicion about the divine nature of their intelligence collection efforts. The telepathic communication system that connected Huginn and Muninn to Odin functioned through mystical bonds that had been established during their creation and strengthened through years of continuous service. These mental links enabled instantaneous transmission of both factual information and emotional impressions across any distance, allowing Odin to receive urgent intelligence immediately rather than waiting for the raven's physical return to Asgard. The system also permitted bidirectional communication, enabling Odin to provide new instructions or request clarification about specific observations without requiring the ravens to interrupt their missions. The ravens' ability to perceive supernatural phenomena that remained hidden from ordinary observation made them particularly valuable for detecting magical activities and divine interventions that might otherwise escape notice. Their enhanced senses could identify the residual traces left by shapeshifting, recognize the distinctive energy signatures associated with different types of magic, and observe spiritual entities that existed in dimensions parallel to the physical realm. This supernatural perception enabled them to provide Odin with comprehensive understanding of both mundane and mystical events that influenced the stability and development of the cosmic order. The wolves Geri and Freki represented Odin's connection to the primal forces of battle and death that shaped the warrior culture central to Germanic society. Their names, meaning greedy and ravenous, reflected their insatiable appetite for combat and their role as harbingers of destruction on battlefields throughout the mortal realm. These magnificent predators possessed size and strength that far exceeded those of ordinary wolves, with muscular frames that suggested both speed and power, while their predatory intelligence enabled them to understand complex tactical situations and respond appropriately to changing battlefield conditions. Their physical appearance commanded immediate respect and fear from both divine and mortal observers, as their massive forms combined the natural beauty of apex predators with supernatural enhancements that mark them as creatures of divine origin. Their fur displayed variations in coloration that shifted between grey, black, and silver depending on lighting conditions and their emotional state, creating an almost liquid appearance that suggested constant motion even when they remained stationary. Their eyes burned within a fire that reflected their connection to the destructive aspects of warfare, while their fangs and claws possessed supernatural sharpness that could penetrate even magical protection. The wolves' behaviour in Valhalla reflected their dual nature as both loyal companions to Odin and embodiments of the savage forces that determined victory and defeat in mortal conflicts. During the daily feast that followed the Einherjar's training battles, Geri and Freki positioned themselves beside Odin's high seat, receiving choice portions of meat from the inexhaustible boar Sleipnir, while maintaining constant vigilance for potential threats to their master's safety. Their presence served both practical and symbolic functions, providing physical protection while representing the ever-present possibility of violence that defined the warrior's existence. The feeding arrangements in Valhalla demonstrated Odin's unique relationship with sustenance and his focus on spiritual rather than physical nourishment. While the Einherjar consumed vast quantities of mead and meat to fuel their supernatural regeneration and maintain their fighting strength, Odin abstained from solid food entirely, instead deriving sustenance from the wine that provided him with prophetic visions and enhanced magical power. The portions that would normally constitute his meal were instead given to Geri and Freki, whose voracious appetites symbolized the endless hunger of war, for fresh victims and the cyclical nature of violence that perpetuated itself through successive generations of conflicts. The wolves' participation in the wild hunt established them as active agents of divine justice, rather than merely passive symbols of destruction. When Odin led his supernatural cavalry across the night sky during times of cosmic significance, Geri and Freki ran alongside Sleipnir and the ghostly horses of the Einherjar, their howls adding to the terrifying cacophony that announced the hunt's passage to mortals below. Their presence during these supernatural expeditions served to identify individuals whose deaths had been decreed by fate, while also inspiring appropriate fear and reverence among those who witnessed the divine procession. The wolves' role in battle extended beyond simple combat participation to include their function as psychopomps, who guided the souls of fallen warriors to their appropriate destinations in the afterlife. Their supernatural senses enabled them to distinguish between warriors who had died honourably in combat and those whose deaths resulted from cowardice, accident or disease, ensuring that only the truly worthy reached Valhalla while others proceeded to less prestigious destinations. This sorting function required sophisticated judgment that combined understanding of individual circumstances with knowledge of cosmic laws governing death and resurrection. The symbolic significance of wolves in Germanic culture provided additional layers of meaning to Geri and Freki's roles as Odin's companions. Wolves represented both the destructive forces that threatened a civilized society and the fierce loyalty that bound warriors to their leaders and comrades. Their pack-hunting behaviour served as a model for effective military organisation, while their willingness to fight to the death in defence of their territory exemplified the courage expected of heroic warriors. The association between wolves and winter reflected the harsh realities of survival in northern climates, where weakness meant death, and only the strongest individuals could endure the challenges of the natural environment. Sleipnir's origins as the offspring of Loki's union with the giant stallion Svadilfari created one of the most unusual genealogical relationships in Norse mythology, while producing the greatest of all horses. The circumstances of his conception occurred during the construction of Asgard's defensive wall, when Loki's shape-shifting abilities and willingness to sacrifice his dignity enabled the gods to avoid paying the agreed-upon price to the unnamed giant builder. Loki's transformation into a mare and subsequent seduction of Svadilfari disrupted the construction schedule sufficiently to prevent the giant from completing his work within the specified time frame, thereby voiding the contract that would have cost the gods the sun, moon and Freya as payment. The pregnancy that resulted from this union subjected Loki to experiences unique among the male gods, as he carried Sleipnir to term and gave birth in his mare form before returning to his normal divine appearance. This biological impossibility reflected Loki's fundamental nature as a boundary crosser who transcended conventional limitations of gender, species, and moral behaviour while serving the gods' interests through methods that they could not employ themselves without compromising their dignity and authority. The birth of Sleipnir represented both the successful resolution of a diplomatic crisis and the creation of a being whose capabilities would prove essential to Odin's future activities. Sleipnir's 8 legs distinguished him immediately from ordinary horses, while providing him with supernatural speed and stability that enabled travel across terrains impossible for normal steeds. The additional limbs functioned in perfect coordination to produce a gait that combined the smoothness of a normal horse's movement with enhanced power and endurance that never seemed to diminish regardless of the distance travelled or the difficulty of the terrain encountered. His ability to maintain this extraordinary pace across all types of surfaces, including air, water, and the branches of Yggdrasil itself, made him uniquely suited to serve as transportation for a god whose responsibilities required constant travel throughout the 9 worlds. The horse's coloration varied according to different sources, with some describing him as grey like his divine rider, while others depicted him as having a coat that shifted between different shades depending on the lighting conditions and the nature of his current journey. His mane and tail flowed with supernatural grace that suggested constant motion even when he stood perfectly still, while his eyes displayed intelligence that clearly marked him as more than a simple beast of burden. The overall impression created by his appearance combined beauty with power in proportions that immediately identified him as a creature of divine origin. Sleipnir's ability to travel between the different worlds required navigation skills that transcended ordinary equine capabilities, as the paths connecting the various realms often involved passage through dimensions that existed outside normal space and time. His supernatural senses enabled him to perceive the hidden doorways and bridges that provided access to these interdimensional passages, while avoiding the numerous hazards that could trap or destroy unwary travellers. The horse's understanding of cosmic geography exceeded that of most divine beings, making him an invaluable guide for journeys that required precise timing and route selection to achieve their intended objectives. The relationship between Odin and Sleipnir transcended the typical bond between rider and mount to encompass elements of partnership and mutual respect that reflected their shared involvement in cosmic responsibilities. Oisin's treatment of his steed demonstrated unusual consideration for the horse's comfort and preferences, while Sleipnir's loyalty and responsiveness exceeded what could be expected from even the most well-trained ordinary animal. Their communication involved subtle cues and shared understanding that enabled them to coordinate their actions with precision that appeared almost telepathic to outside observers. The Valkyries represented Odin's most elite servants, combining martial prowess with divine authority to fulfill their crucial role as selectors of the slain and guides for fallen warriors. These supernatural maidens possessed beauty that inspired both desire and reverence, while their combat skills rivaled those of the greatest divine warriors. Their primary responsibility involved surveying battlefields throughout the mortal realm to identify warriors whose courage and skill qualified them for recruitment into the Einherjar, the army of the dead that would fight beside the gods during Ragnarok. The process of selecting worthy warriors required sophisticated judgment that considered not merely individual combat effectiveness, but also character traits, including loyalty, honour, and willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the greater good. The Valkyries observed potential candidates throughout their military careers, evaluating their performance in multiple engagements while assessing their adherence to the warrior code that defined heroic behaviour. This extended evaluation period ensured that only the most suitable individuals received the honour of dying gloriously in battle and earning admission to Valhalla. Their appearance on battlefields created supernatural phenomena that influenced both the course of combat and the psychological state of participating warriors. The Valkyries rode through the air above the fighting, their armour gleaming with divine radiance while their weapons channeled supernatural forces that could tip the balance of engagements according to Odin's strategic requirements. Their presence inspired exceptional courage in warriors destined for Valhalla, while filling their enemies with supernatural dread that could break formations and cause panic among previously disciplined troops. The individual Valkyries possessed distinct personalities and areas of specialization that enabled them to fulfill different aspects of their collective responsibilities with maximum effectiveness. Some focused primarily on the martial aspects of their duties, serving as battlefield commanders who could coordinate complex military operations while identifying tactical opportunities that mortal generals might overlook. Others specialized in the psychological and spiritual dimensions of their work, providing comfort and guidance to dying warriors while ensuring their smooth transition from mortal existence to their new roles as members of the Einherjar. Their equipment reflected both practical battlefield requirements and their status as divine agents of the Allfather. Their armour combined protection with mobility, enabling them to fight effectively while maintaining the grace and beauty that distinguished them from ordinary warriors. Their weapons possessed supernatural properties that could cut through magical defences, while their shields could deflect attacks that would overwhelm normal protective equipment. Their horses possessed flight capabilities that enabled rapid movement between different battlefields, while their supernatural endurance ensured that the Valkyries could maintain their demanding schedules without fatigue affecting their performance. The Valkyries' responsibilities extended beyond mere battlefield selection to encompass complex diplomatic missions that required them to interact with mortal rulers, negotiate temporary alliances between competing factions, and gather intelligence about political developments that might influence future conflicts. Their divine nature granted them access to royal courts and military councils where ordinary spies could never penetrate, while their beauty and supernatural charisma enabled them to extract sensitive information from even the most cautious leaders. These diplomatic activities often required them to maintain extended deceptions, presenting themselves as mortal women while concealing their true identities and purposes from their targets. Odin's frequent journeys through Midgard in various disguises represented one of his most consistent activities throughout the mythological record, reflecting both his insatiable curiosity about mortal affairs and his practical need to maintain direct oversight of developments that might affect cosmic stability. These expeditions typically involved the adoption of carefully crafted personas that would enable him to move freely through human society, while gathering intelligence about political situations, military capabilities, and the spiritual condition of various peoples. His mastery of shape-shifting and illusion magic allowed him to assume virtually any appearance, from aged beggars to wealthy merchants, while his vast knowledge of human customs and languages enabled him to maintain these deceptions even under close scrutiny. The selection of appropriate disguises required careful consideration of the specific objectives for each journey and the social contexts he intended to penetrate. When investigating the military preparations of potential enemies, Odin often appeared as a wandering veteran whose war stories and tactical knowledge would grant him access to military camps and strategic discussions. His divine understanding of warfare enabled him to provide valuable insights that quickly established his credibility among professional soldiers, while his apparent age and experience made younger warriors eager to seek his counsel on matters of combat technique and battlefield survival. For missions requiring access to royal courts and noble households, Odin frequently adopted the persona of a travelling skald whose poetic abilities and knowledge of heroic traditions made him a welcome guest at formal gatherings. His mastery of the Mead of Poetry enabled him to compose verses that surpassed the abilities of any mortal bard, creating entertainment so compelling that hosts would compete for the privilege of providing him with accommodation and hospitality. These performances also served intelligence-gathering purposes, as the traditional role of skalds included preserving and recounting historical events that revealed important information about dynastic relationships, territorial disputes, and military alliances. The testing of heroes represented one of Odin's most significant activities during these wandering expeditions, as he sought to identify mortal champions whose exceptional qualities might prove valuable during the approaching final battle. These evaluations typically involved presenting potential heroes with moral dilemmas or physical challenges that would reveal their true character under pressure. Odin's tests often required candidates to choose between personal safety and honour, immediate gratification and long-term benefit, or loyalty to friends and obedience to authority, with their responses providing insight into their suitability for eventual recruitment into the Einherjar. The complexity of these heroic trials reflected Odin's understanding that courage in battle, while necessary, represented only one aspect of the qualities required for effective service during Ragnarok. He also evaluated candidates' intelligence, adaptability, leadership potential, and moral integrity, recognizing that the final conflict would require warriors capable of making independent decisions in chaotic situations while maintaining their commitment to the cosmic order, even when faced with apparently hopeless odds. The most promising heroes often found themselves subjected to multiple tests over extended periods, as Odin assessed their consistency and growth under various types of stress. Kings and rulers received particular attention during Odin's wandering expeditions, as their decisions directly influenced the stability and prosperity of entire populations, while their military capabilities could determine the outcomes of regional conflicts that might escalate into cosmic significance. His approach to testing royal figures typically involved appearing as a humble petitioner, whose requests for assistance would reveal the ruler's attitudes toward justice, mercy, and responsibility for their subjects' welfare. These encounters often included subtle magical elements that enhanced the moral weight of the king's choices, while ensuring that their decisions would have lasting consequences that extended beyond the immediate situation. The evaluation of common folk during these journeys provided Odin with essential intelligence about the spiritual and cultural condition of various human populations, information that influenced his long-term strategies for maintaining cosmic stability and preparing for the challenges of Ragnarok. His interactions with farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and other ordinary individuals revealed patterns of belief, social organization, and moral development that indicated whether specific communities were likely to produce worthy warriors or provide reliable support for divine initiatives. These assessments also identified potential threats to cosmic order, such as the spread of nihilistic philosophies or the emergence of charismatic leaders whose influence might undermine traditional values and social structures. The Grimnismal preserved one of the most detailed accounts of Odin's willingness to endure extreme suffering in pursuit of knowledge, describing his 8-night ordeal while bound between fires in the hall of King Geroth. This episode began when Odin and Frigg engaged in a friendly wager about the respective merits of their mortal protégés, with Odin championing King Geroth while Frigg supported his brother Agnar. The competition escalated when Frigg secretly warned Geroth that a dangerous sorcerer would soon arrive at his court, providing a description that matched Odin's intended disguise and ensuring that her husband would receive hostile treatment upon his arrival. Odin's approach to Geroth's hall followed his typical pattern of adopting a carefully constructed false identity that would enable him to observe the king's character while testing his adherence to the sacred laws of hospitality. He presented himself as a wanderer named Grimnir, whose weathered appearance and mysterious manner suggested both wisdom and potential danger to those who encountered him. His refusal to provide detailed information about his origins and purposes created the suspicious circumstances that Frigg had predicted, leading Geroth to conclude that his visitor represented the magical threat about which he had been warned. The decision to torture the mysterious guest rather than simply refusing him hospitality revealed significant flaws in Geroth's character that transformed Odin's initial testing into a more serious evaluation of the king's fitness for continued rule. The binding between two fires represented a particularly cruel form of interrogation that combined physical pain with psychological pressure, as the victim experienced intense heat and smoke while being unable to move or escape the gradually increasing discomfort. This treatment violated fundamental principles of guest right that governed civilized behavior throughout Germanic society, marking Geroth as unworthy of divine favor regardless of his previous accomplishments. The 8 nights of torment that Odin endured while maintaining his disguise demonstrated both his commitment to thorough evaluation of mortal rulers and his willingness to accept personal suffering when cosmic purposes required such sacrifice. The fires positioned on either side of his bound form created waves of heat that alternately scorched and chilled his flesh, as their intensity fluctuated with the addition of fuel and the natural variations in air currents within the hall. The smoke that filled his lungs made breathing difficult, while the constant glare of the flames strained his vision and created disorienting visual effects that added psychological stress to his physical discomfort. Throughout this ordeal, only Agnar, Geroth's young son, showed compassion for the suffering prisoner by secretly providing him with small amounts of water during the night hours when the hall's other occupants slept. This kindness, offered at personal risk and motivated by genuine sympathy rather than expectation of reward, demonstrated the moral qualities that would eventually lead to Agnar's elevation and his father's downfall. The contrast between the son's instinctive compassion and the father's calculated cruelty provided Odin with clear evidence of their respective characters and potential for future development. The revelation of cosmic secrets during Odin's captivity served multiple purposes, establishing his divine authority while simultaneously providing instruction about the fundamental structure of reality to any listeners capable of understanding the significance of his words. His recitation began with basic geographical information about the 9 worlds, describing the locations and characteristics of various realms in terms that demonstrated intimate familiarity with cosmic architecture. These descriptions included details about the distances between worlds, the nature of the barriers separating them, and the pathways that enabled travel between different levels of existence. The enumeration of divine halls and their respective rulers provided insight into the complex hierarchy that governed Asgard while revealing the specialized functions that different gods fulfilled within the cosmic order. Odin's descriptions included architectural details that emphasized the supernatural nature of these structures, such as Valhalla's 540 doors and its roof of golden shields, while also explaining the symbolic significance of various decorative elements and their relationships to the hall's intended purposes. This information served both educational and intimidating functions, demonstrating the speaker's divine knowledge while subtly threatening those who might oppose the cosmic order. The catalogue of supernatural creatures and their roles within the cosmic system revealed the complex ecology of beings that maintained universal stability through their various activities and interactions. Odin's descriptions of the eagle that perched atop Yggdrasil, the dragon that gnawed at the tree's roots, and the squirrel that carried messages between them illustrated the intricate balance of forces that kept the world tree healthy despite the constant threats to its integrity. These details provided listeners with understanding of how seemingly minor creatures contributed to cosmic stability, while warning of the consequences that might result from disrupting these delicate relationships. The revelation of Odin's true identity occurred at the climactic moment when his divine nature could no longer be concealed, and the full weight of Geirrod's transgression became apparent to all present. The transformation from suffering prisoner to revealed deity created a dramatic reversal that demonstrated both the power of divine justice and the terrible consequences of violating sacred laws. Odin's assumption of his true form filled the hall with supernatural radiance, while his voice carried the authority of cosmic law as he pronounced judgment upon those who had witnessed his ordeal. Geirrod's death by his own sword represented the immediate fulfillment of divine justice, while serving as a warning to other rulers who might consider similar violations of hospitality laws. The king's attempt to free his prisoner and beg forgiveness came too late to prevent the consequences of his actions, as cosmic law operated according to principles that transcended human concepts of mercy and redemption. His accidental fall upon his weapon while rushing to cut Odin's bonds created the appearance of suicide, while actually representing the inevitable working of fate that ensured appropriate punishment for his crimes. Odin's deceptive nature manifested most clearly in his interactions with mortal heroes, whose loyalty he cultivated over extended periods before ultimately betraying them when their usefulness ended or cosmic necessity required their deaths. These betrayals reflected his understanding that individual lives, regardless of their heroic qualities or personal devotion to him, remained subordinate to the larger patterns of fate that governed universal development. His ability to form genuine emotional bonds with mortals, while simultaneously planning their eventual destruction, demonstrated the complex psychology of a being whose cosmic responsibilities required him to transcend normal moral limitations. The case of Sigmund provided one of the most poignant examples of Odin's willingness to abandon even his most favoured champions when their time had come according to the dictates of fate. The hero had served as Odin's agent for many years, wielding the divine sword Gram in numerous battles while establishing a reputation for invincibility that made him a legendary figure throughout the Germanic world. His consistent victory in combat and his unwavering loyalty to Odin's cause created a relationship that transcended the typical bond between god and worshipper, approaching something resembling genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and shared experiences. The withdrawal of divine favour from Sigmund occurred during his final battle, when Odin appeared on the battlefield in his role as arbiter of victory and deliberately shattered Gram with his spear Gungnir. This action ensured Sigmund's defeat and death while fulfilling the requirements of fate that demanded the hero's life at that particular moment in cosmic history. The destruction of the enchanted weapon represented more than mere tactical intervention. It symbolized the severing of the mystical bond that had connected hero and god throughout their long association. Sigmund's reaction to this betrayal demonstrated the complex emotions that such divine abandonment created in mortal champions who had dedicated their lives to serving Odin's purposes. Rather than expressing anger or despair at his god's treachery, the dying hero accepted his fate with dignity, while requesting only that the fragments of his broken sword be preserved for his future son. This response reflected both his understanding of the cosmic forces that governed his existence and his continued faith in Odin's ultimate wisdom, despite the personal cost of that divine judgment. The pattern of cultivation followed by betrayal appeared repeatedly throughout Odin's interactions with mortal heroes, creating a reputation for untrustworthiness that paradoxically enhanced his effectiveness as a divine patron. Heroes who sought his favour understood that such relationships carried inherent risks, as divine support inevitably came with a price that might include their own lives when cosmic necessity demanded such payment. This knowledge created a self-selecting process that attracted only the most courageous and fatalistic warriors, individuals whose willingness to accept death as the ultimate expression of loyalty made them ideal candidates for eventual recruitment into the Einherjar. The psychological complexity of these relationships reflected Odin's own internal conflicts between his personal affections and his cosmic responsibilities. His genuine appreciation for heroic qualities and his emotional investment in the development of exceptional individuals created authentic bonds that made their eventual betrayal genuinely painful for him as well as his victims. However, his understanding of the approaching Ragnarok and the need to gather the finest possible army for the final battle required him to prioritize cosmic necessity over personal sentiment, leading to decisions that violated normal concepts of loyalty and friendship. Odin's role as psychopomp extended far beyond the simple transportation of souls from battlefields to Valhalla, encompassing complex responsibilities for evaluating the spiritual worthiness of the dead while ensuring their proper integration into the afterlife realms that best suited their individual characteristics and cosmic destinies. This function required sophisticated understanding of both individual psychology and the cosmic laws that govern death and resurrection, as improper placement of souls could create imbalances that affected the stability of the entire afterlife system. The process of soul evaluation began at the moment of death, when Odin's supernatural senses detected the spiritual emanations that revealed each individual's moral character, combat effectiveness, and potential for future development. This assessment considered not merely the circumstances of death, but the entire pattern of choices and actions that had defined the person's mortal existence. Warriors who died courageously in hopeless situations might prove more valuable than those who achieved easy victories through superior equipment or numerical advantages, while individuals whose deaths resulted from protecting others demonstrated qualities that transcended simple martial prowess. The selection criteria for admission to Valhalla reflected the specific requirements for effective service during Ragnarok, rather than general concepts of moral worthiness or spiritual development. Odin prioritized warriors whose combat skills, tactical understanding, and psychological resilience would contribute most effectively to the final battle, sometimes choosing individuals whose moral characters contained significant flaws if their military capabilities justified such inclusion. This pragmatic approach to recruitment created an Einherjar army that emphasized functional effectiveness over ethical purity, reflecting Odin's understanding that the survival of the cosmic order required victory rather than moral satisfaction. The guidance of souls to their appropriate destinations required precise navigation through the complex geography of the afterlife realms, while avoiding the numerous hazards that threatened unwary travellers in the spaces between worlds. Odin's mastery of interdimensional travel enabled him to escort souls safely through these dangerous passages, while his authority as psychopomp granted him passage through barriers that would block other divine beings. The journey itself served as a final test of the soul's worthiness, as only those who maintained their courage and determination during the disorienting passage could successfully complete the transition to their new existence. The determination of battle outcomes represented one of Odin's most significant responsibilities, requiring him to balance competing factors including cosmic necessity, individual merit, and the long-term consequences of various possible results. His decisions influenced not merely the immediate participants, but entire populations whose futures depended on the success or failure of their military leaders. The complexity of these choices required extensive analysis of political situations, military capabilities, and spiritual conditions that might affect the cosmic order's stability over extended time periods. The cosmic burden of foreseeing Ragnarok, while remaining powerless to prevent it, drove Odin to seek ever more desperate sources of prophetic knowledge, transforming him from a ruler who commanded through strength into a seeker who pursued wisdom through increasingly transgressive means. His enhanced perception following the acquisition of runic knowledge and the Mead of Poetry had revealed disturbing glimpses of the future that demanded fuller understanding, yet the fragmentary nature of these visions left crucial questions unanswered about timing, specific events, and potential methods for survival or mitigation. The weight of cosmic responsibility compelled him to explore every possible avenue for gaining prophetic insight, regardless of the personal cost or moral implications of his methods. The Volva who would provide the most comprehensive revelation of future events dwelt in a realm between life and death, her consciousness suspended in a state that enabled her to perceive the threads of fate with unprecedented clarity. This ancient seeress had practiced her art since the earliest days of creation, accumulating prophetic knowledge through centuries of observation and mystical experience that made her the most authoritative source of information about cosmic destiny. Her location in the borderlands between existence and void required Odin to undertake a perilous journey that tested both his navigational skills and his ability to survive in regions where the normal laws of reality operated inconsistently. The necromantic ritual required to summon the Volva from her death-like trance involved complex preparations that drew upon Odin's mastery of Seder magic, while requiring him to assume roles traditionally associated with feminine practitioners of the mystical arts. He gathered the necessary implements, including a staff carved with runic inscriptions that would channel the spiritual energies needed to bridge the gap between life and death, ritual garments that provided protection against the dangerous forces he would encounter, and offerings of precious metals and sacred substances that would compensate the seeress for sharing her prophetic knowledge. The ritual itself required precise timing that aligned with cosmic cycles governing death and resurrection, as any deviation from the proper schedule would render the summoning ineffective or potentially dangerous. The Volva's awakening created disturbances in the fabric of reality that manifested as supernatural phenomena throughout the 9 worlds, with the dead stirring restlessly in their graves while the barriers between different realms became temporarily permeable to spiritual influences. Her consciousness emerged slowly from its dormant state, requiring patient coaxing from Odin as she struggled to focus her attention on the present moment after eons of existing in a timeless condition that transcended normal temporal boundaries. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried echoes of cosmic forces that made her words resonate with prophetic authority while simultaneously creating physical sensations that reminded listeners of their own mortality. The seeress's initial reluctance to share her knowledge stemmed from her understanding of the terrible burden that prophetic awareness imposed upon those who possessed it, as well as her recognition that Odin's desperate quest for information about the future reflected his inability to accept the limitations that even divine beings faced when confronting cosmic necessity. Her questions about his identity and purposes served both as tests of his worthiness to receive such dangerous knowledge and as attempts to gauge his psychological preparation for learning truths that might prove more devastating than ignorance. The Volva's eventual agreement to provide the requested prophecy came only after Odin demonstrated his willingness to pay whatever price the knowledge might demand. The revelation of Ragnarok began with descriptions of the preliminary signs that would herald the approach of the final destruction, environmental and social changes that would indicate the cosmic order's gradual breakdown in preparation for its ultimate collapse. The Volva described the Fimbul winter, 3 consecutive years of harsh weather that would create famine and desperation throughout the mortal realm while breaking down the social bonds that maintained civilized behavior. During this period, brothers would kill brothers while fathers and sons would become enemies, creating chaos that would weaken the barriers between different worlds and enable the forces of destruction to begin their final assault on the established order. The cosmic wolves Skoll and Hati would finally catch and devour the sun and moon respectively, plunging all the worlds into darkness while eliminating the celestial markers that enabled navigation and the measurement of time. This astronomical catastrophe would create disorientation and panic among both mortals and lesser divine beings, while providing cover for the advancing armies of destruction that would exploit the confusion to achieve maximum strategic advantage. The darkness would also symbolize the triumph of chaos over order, representing the reversal of the creative process that had originally brought light and structure to the primordial void. The liberation of Loki from his torturous imprisonment would mark the beginning of the final phase of cosmic destruction, as his accumulated rage and desire for revenge would drive him to marshal all the forces opposed to the current cosmic order. The Volva described how the earthquakes caused by his struggles would eventually break the bonds that held him, while the poison that had dripped onto his face throughout his captivity would have transformed him into a being of pure malevolence, whose hatred exceeded even his previous capacity for destructive mischief. His freedom would enable him to assume leadership of the giants and monsters who had long awaited the opportunity to overthrow the gods and establish a new cosmic order based on different principles. Fenrir's escape from his magical bonds would occur simultaneously with Loki's liberation, as the cosmic upheavals that freed one would necessarily affect the restraints holding the other. The giant wolf's growth during his imprisonment had continued until his size and strength exceeded even the gods' most pessimistic projections, making him capable of swallowing Odin himself during the final battle, while his supernatural speed would enable him to outrun any attempt at escape or evasion. His rage at his treatment by the gods would fuel a destructive fury that would make him one of the most dangerous opponents the divine forces would face during Ragnarok. The Midgard serpent's emergence from the ocean would poison the sky with its venomous breath, while its massive coils would create tidal waves that would flood coastal regions and destroy human settlements throughout the mortal realm. The serpent's size had increased during its oceanic exile until it could encircle the entire world, while maintaining sufficient strength to crush mountains with its muscular contractions. Its confrontation with Thor would represent one of the most significant individual combats of the final battle, with both participants destined to die from their mutual wounds despite Thor's eventual victory over his ancient enemy. The Volva's description of the final battlefield of Vigrid revealed the cosmic significance of the location where all the accumulated tensions and conflicts of the mythological age would reach their ultimate resolution. This vast plain could accommodate the enormous armies that would gather from throughout the 9 worlds, providing sufficient space for the complex military maneuvers that would determine the fate of gods and mortals alike. The field's supernatural properties would enhance the combat abilities of all participants, while ensuring that the battle's outcome would reflect the true balance of forces rather than being influenced by tactical advantages derived from terrain or positioning. The catalogue of participants in the final battle demonstrated the comprehensive nature of the conflict, as virtually every significant figure from throughout Norse mythology would play a role in determining the ultimate outcome. The Einherjar would march from Valhalla alongside the gods, their numbers swollen by centuries of careful recruitment, while their combat skills had been honed through daily practice that prepared them for this ultimate test. The giants would arrive from Jotunheim led by Loki, and accompanied by monsters and supernatural creatures whose hatred of the current cosmic order had motivated them to join the forces of destruction, despite the risks involved. The specific matchups between individual combatants reflected both personal enmities that had developed throughout the mythological narrative and cosmic principles that required certain confrontations to occur for the proper resolution of universal tensions. Odin's destined battle with Fenrir represented the ultimate test of divine authority against primal chaos, while Thor's confrontation with the Midgard serpent would determine whether protective strength could overcome destructive poison. These individual duels would occur simultaneously with larger military engagements that would decide the fate of entire armies and determine which cosmic principles would survive the universal destruction. The Volva's revelation of Odin's own death during the final battle represented the most devastating aspect of her prophecy, as it confirmed his worst fears about his inability to survive the cosmic catastrophe, despite all his preparations and accumulated power. Fenrir's consumption of the Allfather would symbolise the triumph of chaos over order, while demonstrating the ultimate futility of attempting to prevent fate through divine intervention. The seeress's description of this event combined clinical detachment with subtle compassion, recognising both the cosmic necessity of Odin's death and the personal tragedy it represented for a being who had dedicated his existence to preserving the cosmic order. The prophecy's conclusion, with descriptions of the world's renewal following the destruction, provided some consolation for the terrible revelations about the immediate future, suggesting that the cosmic cycle would eventually produce a new and potentially superior reality. The Volva described how some gods would survive the final battle while new divine beings would emerge to govern the renewed cosmos, creating continuity between the old and new orders while enabling beneficial changes that would address the flaws and limitations of the current system. The survival of certain mortals who would repopulate the cleansed earth offered hope that the accumulated wisdom and cultural achievements of human civilization would not be entirely lost during the universal destruction. Odin's consultation with the Volva concluded with her return to her death-like trance, leaving him alone with the terrible knowledge she had imparted while facing the psychological challenge of continuing his cosmic responsibilities despite knowing their ultimate futility. The prophecy had answered his questions about the future while creating new dilemmas about how to respond to information that revealed both the inevitability of his defeat and the specific circumstances that would lead to his destruction. The weight of this knowledge would influence all his subsequent actions as he struggled to balance acceptance of cosmic necessity with his instinctive drive to fight against fate regardless of the odds. The sacrifice of his eye at Mimir's well represented Odin's willingness to pay the ultimate price for wisdom, trading his physical sight for enhanced spiritual perception that would enable him to understand cosmic forces with unprecedented clarity. The well's location beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots placed it at a nexus of cosmic power where the boundaries between different types of knowledge became permeable, creating conditions that enabled the exchange of physical capabilities for mystical understanding. Mimir's role as guardian of the well reflected his status as one of the wisest beings in existence, whose own sacrifice during the Aesir-Vanir War had transformed him into a repository of prophetic knowledge that exceeded even the Volva's capabilities. The negotiation for access to the well's wisdom required Odin to demonstrate both his worthiness to receive such profound knowledge and his willingness to pay a price commensurate with its value. Mimir's initial refusal to grant the request reflected his understanding of the dangerous nature of prophetic knowledge, and his concern that even Odin might lack the psychological strength necessary to bear the burden of cosmic awareness. The giant's eventual agreement to the exchange came only after extensive discussion that established the specific terms of the transaction, while ensuring that both parties understood the irreversible nature of the sacrifice being contemplated. The physical act of removing his own eye required Odin to overcome natural instincts for self-preservation, while demonstrating his commitment to the pursuit of wisdom regardless of personal cost. The pain involved in the self-mutilation served as a form of initiatory ordeal that prepared his consciousness for receiving the enhanced perception that would result from drinking Mimir's water. The blood that flowed from the empty socket mixed with the well's contents, creating a permanent bond between Odin and the source of cosmic knowledge, while ensuring that his sacrifice would continue to provide benefits throughout his remaining existence. The transformation of perception that followed the sacrifice enabled Odin to see patterns and connections that had previously remained hidden, revealing the underlying structure of reality while providing insight into the forces that shaped past, present and future events. His remaining eye blazed with enhanced intensity that reflected the concentration of visual power into a single organ, while his empty socket became a window into dimensions of existence that transcended normal spatial limitations. The combination of enhanced physical sight and expanded mystical perception created a form of awareness that enabled him to function effectively despite the loss of depth perception and peripheral vision. The wisdom gained through this sacrifice complemented the knowledge acquired through his other ordeals, while providing specific insights into the nature of fate and the mechanisms that governed cosmic development. The well's waters contained memories of all events that had occurred since the beginning of time, enabling Odin to understand the historical patterns that shaped current circumstances, while predicting the likely consequences of various possible actions. This comprehensive understanding of cause and effect relationships provided him with unprecedented strategic advantages, while simultaneously revealing the limitations that constrained even divine intervention in cosmic affairs. Odin's practice of necromancy represented one of his most transgressive activities, violating fundamental taboos about the proper relationship between life and death, while demonstrating his willingness to employ any means necessary to acquire essential knowledge. The raising of dead seers required mastery of magical techniques that challenged the natural order, while risking contamination from the spiritual corruption that affected beings who had crossed the boundary between existence and void. These practices marked him as a boundary crosser who transcended conventional limitations of divine behaviour, while accepting the moral ambiguity that such transgressions inevitably created. The selection of appropriate subjects for necromantic consultation involved identifying deceased individuals whose knowledge or prophetic abilities would provide information unavailable through other means. Odin typically chose Valor, who had practiced seer magic during their lifetimes, as their familiarity with mystical techniques made them more likely to retain their consciousness and abilities after death, while their previous experience with spiritual transformation enabled them to communicate effectively across the boundary between life and death. The process of locating suitable subjects required extensive research into genealogical records and magical traditions that would identify the most promising candidates for resurrection. The rituals required for successful necromancy involved complex preparations that combined runic magic with seer techniques, while requiring precise timing that aligned with cosmic forces governing death and resurrection. Odin gathered materials including grave earth from the subject's burial site, personal possessions that retained spiritual connections to the deceased, and offerings that would motivate the reluctant spirit to return temporarily to physical manifestation. The actual summoning occurred at locations where the barriers between worlds were naturally thin, such as crossroads, burial mounds, or sites where violent deaths had occurred and left residual spiritual disturbances. The consultation with hanged men represented a particularly dark aspect of Odin's necromantic practices, as these victims had died through methods specifically associated with his own worship, while their manner of death created spiritual conditions that enhanced their prophetic abilities. The hanging process had subjected these individuals to experiences that paralleled Odin's own ordeal on Yggdrasil, creating sympathetic connections that enabled more effective communication, while their final moments of consciousness had been spent in states of altered awareness that provided access to prophetic visions. The location of gallows and execution sites created permanent spiritual disturbances that facilitated necromantic operations, while the presence of multiple deaths in the same location provided additional sources of mystical energy. The information obtained through these consultations revealed details about future events that complemented the broader prophecies received from other sources, while providing specific tactical intelligence that would prove essential during the approaching final conflict. The hanged seers possessed knowledge about individual fates and personal destinies that enabled Odin to make informed decisions about recruitment, alliances, and strategic planning that would maximize his chances of success during Ragnarok. Their unique perspective as beings who had experienced both life and death provided insights into the nature of existence that transcended normal philosophical understanding, while their continued consciousness after physical death demonstrated the possibility of survival beyond apparent destruction. Odin's desperate search for methods to prevent or survive the coming apocalypse led him to explore increasingly exotic sources of knowledge and power that might provide alternatives to the fate revealed through conventional prophecy. His investigations included consultations with primordial beings who remembered the time before creation, expeditions to regions of the cosmos that existed outside normal space and time, and experiments with magical techniques that pushed the boundaries of what even divine beings could safely attempt. These efforts reflected both his refusal to accept defeat and his growing recognition that conventional approaches to cosmic problems might prove inadequate when confronting challenges of unprecedented scope and complexity. The exploration of temporal manipulation as a potential solution involved attempts to alter past events that had contributed to the current crisis, while seeking methods for accelerating or delaying the cosmic cycles that governed universal development. Odin's experiments with time travel required him to navigate the dangerous currents of temporal energy that flowed through Yggdrasil's roots, while avoiding paradoxes that might destroy the fabric of reality itself. These investigations revealed the fundamental stability of the cosmic timeline, while demonstrating that major historical events possessed momentum that resisted alteration even by divine intervention. The cosmic responsibilities that shaped Odin's existence as the Allfather created a complex web of divine relationships that reflected both the hierarchical nature of Asgard's governance and the personal bonds that connected him to other members of the divine community. His marriage to Frigg represented far more than a simple political alliance between powerful deities, encompassing a partnership that combined complementary magical abilities with shared concerns about the welfare of their divine children and the stability of the cosmic order. Frigg's mastery of domestic magic and her prophetic gifts created a formidable combination when united with Odin's more aggressive pursuit of knowledge and power, though their different approaches to handling cosmic threats occasionally created tensions that required careful diplomatic resolution. Frigg's prophetic abilities operated through different mechanisms than Odin's hard-won mystical knowledge, as her visions emerged spontaneously from her connection to the web of fate that governed all existence. Her sight penetrated the future with particular clarity when it concerned threats to her family members, enabling her to perceive dangers that might escape Odin's more systematic intelligence-gathering efforts. The Queen of the Gods possessed an intuitive understanding of cosmic patterns that complemented her husband's analytical approach to prophetic interpretation, though her emotional investment in specific outcomes sometimes led her to attempt interventions that conflicted with the broader requirements of cosmic necessity. The complexity of their relationship manifested most clearly during periods when their respective responsibilities created conflicting loyalties or competing strategic priorities. Frigg's primary concern for the welfare of their children, particularly Balder, whose death she foresaw with devastating clarity, drove her to employ protective magic that sometimes interfered with Odin's larger plans for gathering the forces necessary to face Ragnarok. Her attempts to shield their son from the fate she had glimpsed created elaborate schemes that required the cooperation of virtually every being in existence, demonstrating both her formidable organizational abilities and her willingness to challenge cosmic law when family interests were at stake. Their disagreements about appropriate responses to prophetic knowledge revealed fundamental differences in their personalities and approaches to divine governance. Odin's acceptance of fate as an immutable force that required adaptation rather than resistance contrasted sharply with Frigg's maternal instinct to protect her children, regardless of cosmic consequences. These philosophical differences created ongoing tensions that required constant negotiation and compromise, as both recognized that their combined strength provided the best hope for maintaining stability during the increasingly dangerous period leading up to the final destruction. Frigg's role as Queen of Asgard involved complex administrative responsibilities that complemented Odin's more dramatic activities as wanderer and seeker of knowledge. She maintained the daily operations of the divine realm while her husband pursued his various quests and expeditions, ensuring that essential governmental functions continued despite his frequent absences. Her management of diplomatic relationships with other divine factions required sophisticated understanding of political dynamics and cultural sensitivities that enabled her to maintain alliances that might otherwise deteriorate due to Odin's sometimes abrasive personality and his tendency to prioritize cosmic necessity over personal relationships. The Queen's own network of informants and allies provided intelligence that supplemented the information gathered by Odin's ravens and other agents, creating a comprehensive surveillance system that monitored developments throughout the 9 worlds from multiple perspectives. Her sources typically included female practitioners of various magical arts who shared information through informal networks that operated parallel to the more official intelligence-gathering operations directed by the Allfather. These feminine channels of communication often provided insights into domestic and social developments that might escape the attention of Odin's more militarily focused surveillance efforts. Balder's position as the most beloved of the divine children created unique challenges for both his parents, as his exceptional beauty, wisdom, and kindness made him a natural target for the forces of chaos that sought to weaken the cosmic order through attacks on its most precious elements. His prophetic dreams of his own death created a crisis that tested the limits of divine power and parental love, as both Odin and Frigg struggled to find methods for protecting their son while maintaining their broader cosmic responsibilities. The contrast between Balder's gentle nature and the violent world in which he lived emphasized the tragic aspects of existence that even the gods could not escape despite their tremendous power and knowledge. The young god's exceptional qualities manifested in his ability to inspire love and admiration from virtually everyone who encountered him, creating a form of charismatic authority that transcended normal social hierarchies and cultural boundaries. His presence brought peace to conflicts that had previously seemed irreconcilable, while his wisdom provided solutions to problems that had baffled older and more experienced divine counselors. These abilities marked him as a potential successor to Odin's leadership role, though his temperament differed significantly from the cunning and sometimes ruthless approach that his father employed in governing the cosmic order. Baldur's relationship with his father reflected both mutual respect and fundamental differences in their approaches to divine responsibility. The son's instinctive compassion and desire to help others sometimes conflicted with Odin's more strategic thinking and his willingness to sacrifice individuals for the greater good of cosmic stability. These differences created educational opportunities as Odin attempted to prepare Baldur for the harsh realities of divine leadership while respecting his son's moral integrity and natural inclination toward mercy rather than justice. The prophetic dreams that plagued Baldur revealed the approaching threat to his life while creating psychological pressure that affected his ability to fulfill his normal divine functions. The visions combined vivid imagery of his own death with symbolic representations of the cosmic consequences that would follow his destruction, making it clear that his fate was connected to larger patterns of universal development that transcended his individual existence. The recurring nature of these dreams and their increasing intensity suggested that the prophesied events were approaching rapidly, creating urgency that drove both his parents to desperate measures aimed at preventing the foretold catastrophe. Thor's role as defender of Midgard established him as one of the most active and visible members of the divine community, whose regular battles against giant incursions made him a legendary figure among mortal populations throughout the Nine Worlds. His straightforward approach to problem-solving contrasted sharply with his father's preference for cunning and deception, creating a complementary relationship that enabled them to address different types of threats through methods suited to their respective temperaments and abilities. The Thunder God's massive strength and his enchanted hammer, Mjolnir, provided solutions to problems that required direct application of force, while his father's intellectual approach proved more effective when dealing with challenges that demanded subtlety and long-term planning. The father-son relationship between Odin and Thor reflected both mutual respect and occasional frustration with each other's methods and priorities. Thor's impatience with diplomatic complexity and his preference for immediate action sometimes created complications that required Odin's intervention to resolve, while the Allfather's elaborate schemes occasionally placed Thor in situations where his straightforward nature proved inadequate for achieving the desired objectives. Despite these differences, both recognized the value of their complementary approaches and worked together effectively when cosmic threats required their combined efforts. Thor's marriage to Sif and his role as a family man provided him with personal motivations that paralleled his cosmic responsibilities as protector of the mortal realm. His devotion to his wife and children created emotional stakes that enhanced his commitment to defending Midgard against threats that might otherwise seem abstract or distant. The theft of Sif's golden hair by Loki and the subsequent quest to obtain replacement tresses from the dwarfs demonstrated both Thor's fierce protectiveness of his family and his willingness to pursue justice regardless of the personal cost or political complications that might result. The Thunder God's relationship with his divine siblings reflected the complex dynamics that existed within Odin's extended family, where individual personalities and competing interests created both cooperation and conflict, depending on the circumstances involved. His protective instincts extended beyond his immediate family to encompass his divine brothers and sisters, though his methods of assistance sometimes created additional problems that required careful management. The balance between family loyalty and cosmic responsibility created ongoing tensions that required constant negotiation and adjustment as circumstances changed and new challenges emerged. Thor's destined role in the final battle of Ragnarok as the opponent of the Midgard serpent established him as one of the key figures whose actions would determine the outcome of the cosmic conflict. His victory over the great serpent would represent the triumph of protective strength over destructive chaos, though his own death from the creature's poison would demonstrate the ultimate cost of maintaining cosmic order against overwhelming opposition. This prophesied fate created additional pressure on the relationship between father and son, as both understood that their time together was limited, while the approaching final battle would test their respective abilities to their absolute limits. Vidar's role as the silent god who would survive Ragnarok and avenge his father's death made him one of the most significant figures in the cosmic drama, despite his relatively low profile during the current age. His exceptional strength, second only to Thor among the Aesir, combined with his quiet wisdom and careful preparation for his destined role, marked him as a crucial element in the divine plan for cosmic renewal following the universal destruction. The thick boot that he wore on one foot, constructed from leather scraps collected throughout history, would enable him to step safely on Fenrir's lower jaw while he tore the great wolf apart with his bare hands, fulfilling the vengeance that cosmic justice demanded. The relationship between Odin and Vidar reflected the Allfather's recognition that survival beyond Ragnarok required different qualities than those needed for leadership during the current age. Vidar's patient nature and his ability to endure hardship without complaint made him ideally suited for the difficult task of rebuilding civilization after the destruction of the existing cosmic order. His silence represented not lack of wisdom, but rather the understanding that words were less important than actions when dealing with ultimate challenges that transcended normal communication and negotiation. Vali's rapid maturation and his role as the avenger of Baldur's death demonstrated the cosmic principle that justice required immediate action even when normal legal procedures proved inadequate for addressing unprecedented crimes. His birth following Odin's union with the giantess Rinda occurred specifically to produce an agent capable of killing Hodder without violating the complex network of oaths and obligations that prevented other divine beings from taking direct action against Baldur's unwitting murderer. The necessity of creating a new god specifically for this purpose revealed both the complexity of divine law and the lengths to which cosmic justice would go to ensure appropriate punishment for crimes against the cosmic order. The young god's single-minded focus on his destined task reflected the specialized nature of his creation and his understanding that his existence served a specific cosmic purpose that transcended normal considerations of family loyalty or personal preference. His willingness to kill his half-brother Hodder, despite the tragic circumstances that had led to Baldur's death, demonstrated the harsh requirements of cosmic justice and the sacrifices that maintaining universal order sometimes demanded from even the most reluctant participants. Odin's leadership of the Divine Council required sophisticated diplomatic skills that enabled him to balance competing interests and personalities while maintaining the unity necessary for effective governance of the cosmic order. The regular assemblies of the gods provided forums for discussing policy decisions, resolving disputes, and coordinating responses to various threats that required collective action. His role as moderator of these gatherings demanded both authoritative presence and flexible negotiation skills that could accommodate the strong personalities and diverse perspectives that characterized the divine community. The political dynamics within Asgard reflected the complex relationships between gods, whose individual domains sometimes created conflicting interests or competing claims for resources and authority. Odin's management of these tensions required careful attention to maintaining balance between different factions while ensuring that essential functions continued to operate effectively despite ongoing disagreements about methods and priorities. His success in maintaining divine unity, despite these challenges, demonstrated both his political acumen and his understanding of the personalities and motivations that drove his fellow gods. The integration of the Vanir hostages into Aesir society following the conclusion of their war created additional diplomatic challenges that required ongoing attention to prevent the renewal of hostilities between the two divine factions. Njordr, Freyr and Freya brought different cultural perspectives and magical traditions that enriched Asgard's capabilities while sometimes creating friction with established Aesir customs and practices. Odin's successful management of this integration process demonstrated his ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the essential stability that cosmic governance required. The relationship between Odin and Loki represented one of the most complex and ultimately tragic aspects of the divine community's internal dynamics, evolving from blood brotherhood and mutual respect to bitter enmity that would culminate in their mutual destruction during Ragnarok. Their early partnership had been based on complementary abilities that made them an exceptionally effective team when dealing with challenges that required both cunning intelligence and willingness to employ morally questionable methods. Loki's shape-shifting abilities and his talent for deception provided solutions to problems that even Odin's considerable skills could not address through conventional means. The blood brotherhood that bound them together created obligations and loyalties that transcended normal political alliances, establishing a relationship that both gods initially valued as one of their most important personal connections. Their shared adventures and successful collaborations in resolving various crises had demonstrated the effectiveness of their partnership while creating mutual respect and genuine affection that made their eventual estrangement particularly painful for both participants. The gradual deterioration of their relationship reflected broader changes in cosmic circumstances that placed increasing pressure on all divine relationships, while revealing fundamental differences in their approaches to moral responsibility. Loki's increasing unpredictability and his growing resentment of his ambiguous status within Asgard created tensions that eventually overwhelmed the bonds of friendship and mutual obligation that had previously held their relationship together. His transformation from helpful trickster to malevolent enemy occurred gradually through a series of increasingly serious transgressions that tested Odin's patience and loyalty, while demonstrating Loki's fundamental alienation from the cosmic order that the Allfather was sworn to protect. The breaking point came with Loki's role in orchestrating Baldur's death, an act that violated the most fundamental taboos of divine society while revealing the depth of his hatred for the established order. The punishment that followed Loki's final transgression reflected both the severity of his crimes and the personal pain that his betrayal had caused Odin and the other gods who had previously considered him a trusted ally. The elaborate torture involving the serpent whose venom dripped onto his bound face represented not merely justice, but also the emotional response of divine beings who felt personally betrayed by someone they had loved and trusted. The knowledge that this punishment would eventually lead to Loki's liberation and his leadership of the forces of destruction during Ragnarok added tragic irony to the situation, as the gods' desire for revenge would ultimately contribute to their own destruction. The mastery of Cedar magic marked one of Odin's most controversial and transformative achievements, requiring him to cross fundamental gender boundaries that Germanic society considered inviolable, while acquiring powers that challenged the traditional masculine approach to divine authority. Cedar represented a form of magic fundamentally different from the runic knowledge he had gained through his self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil, operating through intuitive understanding of natural forces and spiritual manipulation rather than systematic application of symbolic formulas. This magical tradition originated with the Vanir gods, particularly Freyja, who served as its primary practitioner and teacher, making Odin's decision to learn these arts a significant departure from conventional Aesir approaches to supernatural power. The feminine nature of Cedar magic in Norse culture stemmed from its association with fertility, prophecy, and the manipulation of fate itself, domains traditionally governed by goddesses and mortal women who possessed the spiritual sensitivity necessary for such delicate work. Male practitioners of Cedar faced accusations of ergi, a term encompassing both sexual deviance and the adoption of feminine roles that violated fundamental concepts of masculine honor and social propriety. The stigma attached to such practices created significant social costs for any male who chose to pursue Cedar knowledge, making Odin's commitment to mastering these arts a demonstration of his willingness to sacrifice personal reputation in pursuit of cosmic necessity. Freya's role as Odin's instructor in cedar magic created a complex teacher-student relationship that challenged normal hierarchical structures within the divine community. The Vanir goddess possessed knowledge and abilities that the Allfather lacked, forcing him to assume the humble position of a student seeking wisdom from a source he could not command or control. This reversal of normal power dynamics required Odin to demonstrate genuine respect for Freya's expertise, while acknowledging the limitations of his own magical knowledge despite his status as ruler of the gods. The instruction process involved not merely the transmission of technical information, but also the cultivation of spiritual sensitivities and emotional awareness that differed significantly from the intellectual approach that characterized Odin's previous magical education. The practice of Seda required the practitioner to enter trance states that enabled communication with spiritual entities and manipulation of the invisible forces that shaped physical reality. These altered states of consciousness involved techniques including rhythmic chanting, repetitive movements, and the use of specialized tools that helped focus the practitioner's attention while opening channels to supernatural realms. The cedar staff, carved with protective runes and decorated with symbolic elements representing various spiritual forces, served as both a ritual implement and a focus for channeling magical energy during complex workings that required precise control over multiple supernatural elements. The divinatory aspects of cedar magic enabled practitioners to perceive future events through direct spiritual contact with the Norns and other entities who possessed knowledge of fate's weaving. This prophetic ability operated through different mechanisms than the systematic consultation of runes or the formal questioning of oracles, relying instead on intuitive interpretation of symbolic visions and spiritual impressions that emerged during trance states. The accuracy of cedar divination depended heavily on the practitioner's ability to maintain clear spiritual perception while avoiding the distortions that could result from personal desires or fears influencing the interpretation of prophetic imagery. Odin's mastery of shape-shifting represented one of the most dramatic applications of cedar magic, enabling him to assume animal forms that provided access to different types of sensory experience and physical capabilities. The transformation process required complete dissolution of his normal divine form, followed by reconstruction according to the chosen animal's physical and spiritual characteristics. This metamorphosis involved not merely external appearance, but also fundamental changes in consciousness that enabled him to think and perceive reality from the animal's perspective, while retaining sufficient human awareness to control the transformation and achieve his intended objectives. The selection of appropriate animal forms for specific purposes required sophisticated understanding of each creature's natural abilities and spiritual significance within the cosmic order. Odin's preference for birds of prey, particularly eagles and ravens, reflected his need for aerial mobility and enhanced vision that would enable reconnaissance activities across vast distances. His occasional adoption of wolf form provided access to enhanced sensory capabilities and pack-hunting instincts that proved valuable during certain types of combat or tracking situations. The assumption of serpent form enabled navigation through narrow spaces and underground passages while providing access to the chthonic wisdom associated with earth-dwelling creatures. The psychological challenges of shape-shifting included the constant risk of losing human consciousness entirely and becoming trapped within the animal form permanently. The longer Odin remained transformed, the stronger the animal's instincts became relative to his divine awareness, creating pressure that required constant vigilance to maintain proper balance between human and animal consciousness. Extended shape-shifting sessions demanded exceptional mental discipline and spiritual strength to resist the gradual erosion of identity that could result from prolonged immersion in non-human modes of perception and behaviour. Spirit travel represented another crucial aspect of Odin's shamanic practice, enabling his consciousness to separate from his physical body and explore distant realms, while his corporeal form remained in trance-like suspension. This technique required careful preparation, including protective rituals that would prevent hostile spiritual entities from possessing his vacant body, while ensuring that his consciousness retained sufficient connection to enable successful return from the spirit journey. The process involved gradual loosening of the bonds that normally kept soul and body united, followed by directed projection of awareness toward the intended destination. The navigation of spiritual realms during out-of-body travel required different skills than physical movement through normal space, as the spirit worlds operated according to symbolic rather than geographical principles. Distances and directions in these realms corresponded to emotional and conceptual relationships rather than physical proximity, making successful navigation dependent on the traveller's understanding of mythological and spiritual symbolism. Odin's extensive knowledge of cosmic structure and divine relationships provided him with the conceptual framework necessary for effective spirit travel, while his experience with various magical traditions enabled him to recognize and avoid the numerous hazards that threatened unwary spiritual explorers. The communion with the dead represented one of the most dangerous and morally ambiguous aspects of Odin's shamanic practice, requiring him to cross the boundaries between life and death while risking spiritual contamination from contact with entities that had been transformed by their passage into the underworld. The techniques for establishing communication with deceased beings varied depending on the specific circumstances of their deaths and their current spiritual conditions, with warriors who had died in battle requiring different approaches than those who had perished from disease or old age. The process typically involved offering appropriate compensation for the spirit's cooperation, while providing them with temporary access to life force that would enable coherent communication. The information obtained through necromantic consultation often proved crucial for understanding historical events and their continuing influence on current circumstances, as the dead retained memories of their mortal experiences while gaining access to knowledge about the spiritual dimensions of existence that remained hidden from the living. Deceased Valur proved particularly valuable sources of prophetic information, as their previous experience with divination magic enabled them to maintain their oracular abilities after death, while their spiritual condition provided them with enhanced perception of fate's patterns. The consultation process required careful questioning techniques that would elicit accurate information while avoiding the deceptions that some spirits employed to mislead or manipulate living practitioners. The 18 magical charms listed in the Havamal represented the culmination of Odin's mystical education, providing him with a comprehensive toolkit of supernatural abilities that addressed virtually every type of challenge he might encounter during his cosmic responsibilities. These charms combined elements from various magical traditions, including runic formulas, cedar techniques, and shamanic practices that he had acquired through his extensive studies and ordeals. The systematic organization of these abilities into 18 distinct categories reflected both the practical requirements of divine governance and the symbolic significance of the number 18 within Norse cosmological systems. The first charm provided Odin with the ability to heal wounds and illnesses through the application of mystical energy channeled through specific runic formulas and incantations. This healing power operated through direct manipulation of the life force that animated living beings, enabling him to accelerate natural recovery processes while counteracting the effects of poison, disease, and supernatural curses that might otherwise prove fatal. The charm's effectiveness depended on the practitioner's understanding of the spiritual causes underlying physical ailments, as many injuries and illnesses resulted from disruptions in the victim's relationship with cosmic forces rather than simple material damage. The second charm granted protection against various forms of magical attack, including curses, hostile spirits, and supernatural weapons that could penetrate normal physical defenses. This protective ability created an invisible barrier around Odin that deflected negative energy while neutralizing attempts to influence his mind or emotions through mystical means. The charm's activation required specific mental disciplines and ritual gestures that aligned his personal energy with cosmic forces of protection and purification, creating a state of spiritual invulnerability that could withstand even the most powerful forms of magical assault. The third charm provided the ability to bind enemies through mystical restraints that operated independently of physical bonds or conventional weapons. This power enabled Odin to immobilize opponents without causing permanent harm, while creating opportunities for negotiation or escape that might otherwise prove impossible. The binding effect operated through manipulation of the target's spiritual energy rather than their physical form, creating paralysis that could not be overcome through normal strength or conventional magic, while leaving the victim fully conscious and capable of communication. The fourth charm offered protection against fire and heat, enabling Odin to survive exposure to flames that would normally prove fatal, while providing immunity to the supernatural fires employed by various divine and demonic entities. This protection operated through the creation of a cooling field that surrounded his body, while channeling excess thermal energy away from vulnerable tissues. The charm proved particularly valuable during his various ordeals and dangerous journeys that exposed him to extreme temperatures and supernatural flames that could damage even divine physiology. The fifth charm provided the ability to stop arrows and other projectiles in mid-flight through the manipulation of kinetic energy and trajectory paths. This defensive technique required precise timing and spatial awareness that enabled Odin to identify incoming threats and apply the appropriate mystical forces to neutralize them before impact. The charm's effectiveness extended beyond simple physical projectiles to include magical attacks that traveled through space in projectile form, making it a versatile defensive tool that could counter various types of ranged assault. The sixth charm granted immunity to magical curses and hostile enchantments that might otherwise influence Odin's behavior or compromise his judgment during critical situations. This protection operated through the creation of spiritual barriers that prevented external magical influences from penetrating his consciousness, while maintaining his ability to employ his own mystical abilities without interference. The charm proved essential during diplomatic encounters with potentially hostile entities who might attempt to influence negotiations through supernatural means rather than conventional persuasion. The seventh charm provided the ability to extinguish fires through mystical means, enabling Odin to counter arson attacks and prevent the spread of destructive blazes that might threaten important structures or populations. This power operated through the manipulation of elemental forces that governed combustion processes, creating conditions that prevented flames from maintaining their chemical reactions while dispersing the heat energy that sustained burning materials. The charm proved particularly valuable during military conflicts where fire represented a primary weapon employed by various enemies. The eighth charm offered protection against drowning and other water-related hazards through the manipulation of buoyancy and the creation of air pockets that could sustain breathing even while submerged. This ability enabled Odin to survive underwater for extended periods, while providing him with enhanced swimming capabilities that exceeded normal divine physical limitations. The charm proved essential during journeys that required crossing dangerous bodies of water or exploring underwater locations where valuable knowledge or resources might be hidden. The ninth charm provided the ability to calm storms and control weather patterns through the manipulation of atmospheric forces and the spiritual entities that governed meteorological phenomena. This power enabled Odin to ensure favourable conditions for important journeys while preventing natural disasters that might threaten mortal populations or interfere with cosmic stability. The charm's effectiveness required understanding of the complex relationships between different weather systems and the spiritual forces that influenced their development and movement patterns. The 10th charm granted the ability to dispel hostile spirits and banish supernatural entities that posed threats to cosmic order or individual safety. This power operated through the projection of divine authority that compelled lesser spiritual beings to retreat, while providing protection against possession and other forms of supernatural interference. The charm proved particularly valuable during necromantic operations and journeys through spiritually dangerous regions where hostile entities might attempt to interfere with important missions. The 11th charm provided enhanced leadership abilities that enabled Odin to inspire exceptional loyalty and courage in his followers, while coordinating complex military operations that required precise timing and coordination. This power operated through the projection of charismatic authority that transcended normal social hierarchies, while providing followers with supernatural confidence and clarity of purpose during challenging situations. The charm proved essential during the recruitment and training of the Einherjar, who would fight beside the gods during Ragnarok. The 12th charm offered the ability to reveal hidden enemies and detect deception through enhanced perception that penetrated various forms of concealment and misdirection. This power enabled Odin to identify threats that might otherwise remain hidden while evaluating the truthfulness of information provided by potentially unreliable sources. The charm operated through the enhancement of spiritual senses that could perceive the emotional and psychological states underlying external appearances and verbal communications. The 13th charm provided the ability to consecrate water and other substances for ritual use, while imbuing them with protective and healing properties that enhanced their effectiveness in various magical applications. This power enabled Odin to create blessed materials that could be distributed to allies and followers for protection against various supernatural threats, while providing enhanced effectiveness for their own magical practices. The charm proved particularly valuable for maintaining the spiritual health of communities that faced ongoing exposure to hostile magical influences. The 14th charm granted comprehensive knowledge of the genealogies and relationships that connected various divine, giant, and mortal families throughout the 9 worlds. This information proved crucial for understanding political dynamics and potential alliances, while identifying individuals whose bloodlines might provide them with special abilities or vulnerabilities that could influence their roles in cosmic events. The charm operated through direct access to the spiritual records that preserve the history of all significant bloodlines and their various interconnections. The 15th charm provided the ability to induce prophetic dreams and visions in others, while enhancing their capacity to understand and remember the symbolic content of these spiritual experiences. This power enabled Odin to share important information about future events, while preparing selected individuals for the roles they would need to fulfill during approaching crises. The charm operated through the manipulation of dream states and the spiritual channels that connected individual consciousness to cosmic knowledge sources. The 16th charm offered the ability to influence the emotions and desires of others through subtle manipulation of their psychological states and spiritual energies. This power enabled Odin to resolve conflicts through peaceful means, while encouraging cooperation and understanding between potentially hostile parties. The charm operated through the projection of emotional influences that enhance positive feelings while diminishing negative emotions that might interfere with rational decision-making and constructive dialogue. The 17th charm provided mastery over various forms of love magic that could inspire romantic attraction, while healing emotional wounds and restoring broken relationships. This power enabled Odin to resolve personal conflicts that might otherwise escalate into larger political problems, while ensuring that important alliances remained stable despite the personal tensions that could develop between strong-willed individuals. The charm operated through the manipulation of emotional and spiritual bonds that connected individuals, while enhancing their capacity for empathy and mutual understanding. The 18th charm, which Odin refused to reveal completely, apparently provided ultimate knowledge about the deepest mysteries of existence, including the true nature of fate and the possibilities for transcending the limitations that normally constrained even divine beings. This final charm represented the culmination of all his magical learning, while providing access to powers that exceeded anything available through conventional mystical practices. The secrecy surrounding this charm reflected both its dangerous nature and Odin's understanding that such ultimate knowledge could prove destructive if shared inappropriately with beings unprepared for its implications. Odin's role as teacher of magic to selected gods and mortals reflected his understanding that the preservation and transmission of mystical knowledge required careful cultivation of appropriate students who could continue these traditions even if their original practitioners were destroyed during cosmic catastrophes. His instruction methods varied according to the specific needs and capabilities of individual students, with some requiring extensive theoretical preparation, while others learned most effectively through practical application and direct experience. The selection of appropriate students required careful evaluation of character traits including dedication, moral integrity, and psychological stability that would enable them to handle dangerous magical knowledge without being corrupted or overwhelmed by its power. The teaching of runic magic to other gods involved sharing the systematic knowledge he had gained through his ordeal on Yggdrasil, while ensuring that each student understood both the practical applications and the spiritual principles underlying effective runic practice. This instruction required extensive explanation of symbolic relationships and cosmic correspondences that gave the runes their power, while providing students with the theoretical framework necessary for developing their own innovative applications of runic knowledge. The process typically involved years of study and practice that gradually built the students' capabilities while ensuring that they developed the wisdom necessary for responsible use of such powerful tools. The transmission of Siddha techniques to selected practitioners required even more careful screening and preparation, as this form of magic involved greater psychological risks and more complex spiritual disciplines than runic practice. Students of Siddha needed to develop enhanced spiritual sensitivity and emotional awareness, while learning to navigate the dangerous trance states that enabled effective practice of these arts. The instruction process involved gradual exposure to increasingly challenging spiritual experiences that built the students' capabilities while ensuring that they developed appropriate protective techniques and ethical guidelines for their magical practice. Human recipients of Odin's magical instruction typically received more limited training that focused on specific techniques suited to their particular needs and capabilities, rather than comprehensive magical education. These mortal students often served as agents who could employ their magical abilities to advance Odin's strategic objectives, while providing him with additional resources for monitoring and influencing developments throughout the mortal realm. The instruction provided to humans required careful adaptation to account for their limited lifespans and reduced spiritual capabilities compared to divine beings, focusing on practical applications that could be mastered within mortal timeframes while providing maximum benefit for both student and teacher. The Volva's prophecy had revealed the terrible specifics of Odin's final confrontation with Fenrir, describing how the monstrous wolf would break free from his magical bonds as the cosmic upheavals preceding Ragnarok weakened the mystical restraints that had held him captive since his binding by the gods. The seeress spoke of how Fenrir's rage, accumulated through centuries of imprisonment and nourished by the constant dripping of Loki's poisonous saliva during his own torment, would transform the already massive wolf into a creature of unprecedented size and fury. His jaws would grow so enormous that, when opened, his lower jaw would touch the earth while his upper jaw scraped the heavens, creating a maw capable of swallowing the sun itself. The prophecy detailed how Odin would face this ultimate embodiment of chaos mounted on Sleipnir, his eight-legged steed carrying him across the battlefield of Vigrid with supernatural speed that had never failed him throughout countless previous encounters. The Allfather would wield Gungnir, his unerring spear that had determined the outcome of every battle since its forging by the sons of Ivaldi, while wearing armour crafted from the finest materials available in all the 9 worlds. His single remaining eye would blaze with the accumulated wisdom of ages as he charged toward his prophesied doom, fully aware that this confrontation would end his existence, yet driven by cosmic duty to face his destiny with the courage befitting the ruler of the gods. The Volva described how the battle between god and wolf would rage across the vast plain of Vigrid, their combat creating earthquakes that would shake the foundations of all the worlds, while their roars would drown out even the sounds of the other titanic struggles occurring simultaneously around them. Odin's tactical brilliance and centuries of combat experience would enable him to wound Fenrir repeatedly with perfectly aimed thrusts of Gungnir, each strike drawing divine blood that would steam and hiss as it struck the earth. The wolf's supernatural resilience and his burning desire for revenge would enable him to continue fighting despite injuries that would have felled any normal creature, his fury growing stronger with each wound inflicted by his divine opponent. The prophecy revealed that Odin's death would come not from any failure of skill or courage, but from the simple mathematical reality that Fenrir's size and strength exceeded even divine capabilities when enhanced by the cosmic forces of destruction that flowed through him during the final battle. The wolf's massive jaws would eventually close around both horse and rider, Sleipnir's supernatural speed proving insufficient to escape the creature whose growth had been nourished by cosmic chaos itself. The Allfather's final moments would be spent in darkness, surrounded by the wolf's crushing teeth, while his divine essence was consumed by the embodiment of everything he'd spent his existence fighting against. Odin's preparations for the end times had consumed his attention and resources throughout the latter portions of his reign, as his prophetic knowledge of the approaching catastrophe drove him to gather every possible advantage for the final conflict. The recruitment of the Einherjar represented the most visible aspect of these preparations, as his Valkyries scoured battlefields throughout the mortal realm to identify warriors whose courage, skill, and character qualified them for service in the army of the dead. The selection process required sophisticated evaluation of each candidate's combat abilities, psychological resilience, and capacity for growth under the intense training regimen that would prepare them for fighting alongside gods against opponents of unprecedented power and malevolence. The daily routine established in Valhalla for training the Einherjar reflected Odin's understanding that the final battle would require warriors capable of fighting effectively in chaotic conditions against enemies who possess supernatural abilities far exceeding those of normal opponents. Each morning the chosen dead would arm themselves with weapons that maintained their sharpness and effectiveness, regardless of the punishment inflicted during training, while their bodies possessed the supernatural resilience necessary to survive wounds that would permanently disable or kill living warriors. The combat exercises involved increasingly complex scenarios that tested not only individual fighting skills, but also unit cohesion and tactical flexibility under extreme pressure. The afternoon feasting that followed each day's training served multiple purposes beyond simple reward for the warrior's efforts, as the consumption of Sleipnir's regenerating flesh and Heidrun's supernatural mead provided the Einherjar with enhanced physical capabilities and spiritual strength that would prove essential during the actual conflict. The boar's meat contained mystical properties that increased the warrior's resilience and combat effectiveness, while the goat's meat enhanced their courage and battle fury to levels that exceeded normal human limitations. These supernatural substances also created bonds of fellowship among the Einherjar that transcended their previous tribal and cultural loyalties, forging them into a unified force capable of coordinating complex military operations despite their diverse origins. Odin's diplomatic efforts to secure alliances with various factions throughout the Nine Worlds reflected his recognition that the final battle would require every available source of strength and support to have any chance of success against the combined forces of chaos. His negotiations with giant clans who opposed Loki's leadership involved careful balancing of promises and threats that would convince them to remain neutral or even provide active assistance during the critical moments of the conflict. These discussions required extensive knowledge of giant politics and individual motivations, as each clan possessed different grievances against the current cosmic order and varying degrees of willingness to risk their existence in support of either side. The Allfather's attempts to strengthen the physical defences of Asgard involved both magical enhancements and conventional fortifications that would enable the divine realm to withstand the initial assaults by the forces of destruction, while providing secure bases for launching counterattacks. The Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost received additional protective enchantments that would prevent enemy forces from using it to gain direct access to the god's stronghold, while the walls surrounding Asgard were reinforced with materials gathered from throughout the cosmos, and blessed with the most powerful protective magic available to divine craftsmen. The stockpiling of weapons and magical implements represented another crucial aspect of Odin's preparations, as he recognized that the final battle would place unprecedented demands on the god's equipment and resources. The divine armour is filled with spears forged by the finest dwarven smiths, shields inscribed with protective runes that could deflect supernatural attacks, and armour crafted from materials that provided maximum protection while maintaining the flexibility necessary for effective combat. The magical implements included staffs carved with runic formulas for battlefield sorcery, amulets that would protect their wearers against specific types of supernatural assault, and ritual tools that could channel divine power with maximum efficiency during the chaos of combat. Odin's son Vidar occupied a unique position within the cosmic drama of Ragnarok, as the prophecies identified him as one of the few gods destined to survive the universal destruction while playing a crucial role in avenging his father's death. The silent god's exceptional strength, which rivaled even Thor's mighty power, combined with his patient wisdom and careful preparation for his prophesied role, made him one of the most important figures in the divine plan for cosmic renewal. His deliberate cultivation of the qualities necessary for survival beyond the apocalypse reflected both his understanding of his destiny and his commitment to fulfilling the cosmic responsibilities that would fall to him in the post-Ragnarok world. The construction of Vidar's legendary thick boot represented one of the most methodical and long-term preparation projects undertaken by any of the gods, as he collected leather scraps and discarded footwear materials from throughout the Nine Worlds over the course of centuries. Every piece of leather that mortals trimmed from their shoes or boots, every scrap of hide that was discarded during the crafting of footwear, found its way into Vidar's collection through supernatural means that ensured no potentially useful material was wasted. The accumulated materials were then carefully sorted and processed, using techniques that preserve their individual strengths while enabling them to be woven together into a composite structure of unprecedented durability. The boot's supernatural properties derived not merely from its physical construction, but from the spiritual significance of the materials used in its creation, as each piece of leather carried with it the hopes and struggles of the mortals who had originally worn it. The accumulated human experience embedded within the boot's structure provided it with mystical resilience that exceeded what could be achieved through purely physical means, creating footwear capable of withstanding the crushing power of Fenrir's jaws, while providing its wearer with the stability necessary for delivering the vengeance that cosmic justice demanded. Vidar's role in the final battle would begin only after witnessing his father's death, as the sight of Odin's consumption by the great wolf would trigger the rage and determination necessary for him to overcome his naturally peaceful disposition and engage in the violent action required by his destiny. The prophecies described how he would stride across the battlefield with supernatural speed that enabled him to reach Fenrir before the wolf could fully digest his divine meal, his thick boot providing protection against the creature's snapping jaws, while his bare hands possessed the strength necessary to tear apart even a monster of such enormous size and power. The actual slaying of Fenrir would occur through Vidar's placement of his booted foot on the wolf's lower jaw, using the supernatural footwear to prevent the creature from closing its mouth, while he grasped the upper jaw with his hands and tore the massive head apart through sheer physical force. This act of vengeance would represent not merely personal revenge for his father's death, but the cosmic principle that chaos could not ultimately triumph over order, even when it achieved temporary victories that seemed to demonstrate its superiority. The wolf's destruction would eliminate one of the most dangerous threats to cosmic stability, while providing a foundation for the renewal that would follow the universal destruction. Vidar's survival of Ragnarok would depend on his ability to avoid the various catastrophes that would destroy most of the other gods, including the mutual annihilation of Thor and the Midgard serpent, the deaths of Freyr and Heimdall in their respective battles, and the final conflagration that would consume most of the existing cosmic structure. His patient nature and careful preparation would enable him to find shelter in locations that would remain safe during the worst phases of the destruction, while his supernatural resilience would allow him to endure the environmental chaos that would make survival impossible for less hardy beings. The post-Ragnarok world that Vidar would help to govern would emerge from the ashes of the old cosmos, purified of the corruption and conflicts that had led to the universal destruction, providing opportunities for implementing improved systems of cosmic governance that would avoid the mistakes and limitations of the previous order. His role as one of the surviving gods would involve both preserving the valuable elements of the old world's wisdom and traditions while adapting to the changed conditions that would characterize the renewed cosmos. The experience gained through witnessing the destruction of the previous order would provide him with unique insights into the factors that contributed to cosmic instability, enabling him to help establish more sustainable patterns of divine governance. Odin's enduring influence on the post-Ragnarok world would manifest through the survival of his wisdom and teachings in the memories of the gods and other beings who had lived to see the cosmic renewal. Vidar's intimate knowledge of his father's methods and philosophy would enable him to preserve the most valuable aspects of Odin's approach to cosmic governance, while avoiding the mistakes and character flaws that had contributed to the previous order's downfall. The runic knowledge that Odin had acquired through his self-sacrifice would survive the universal destruction, providing the renewed cosmos with access to the magical techniques and cosmic understanding necessary for maintaining stability and preventing the recurrence of the conflicts that had led to Ragnarok. The Einherjar who survived the final battle would carry with them the military traditions and tactical knowledge that Odin had instilled during their training in Valhalla, ensuring that the renewed world would possess effective methods for defending against future threats while maintaining the warrior values that had defined the heroic ideal throughout the previous cosmic age. Their experiences during the apocalyptic conflict would provide them with unique insights into the nature of ultimate challenges and the qualities necessary for overcoming seemingly impossible odds, making them valuable advisors and leaders during the difficult period of reconstruction that would follow the universal destruction. The cyclical nature of Norse cosmology suggested that Odin's death during Ragnarok represented not a final ending but rather a necessary transition that would enable the emergence of improved cosmic conditions that could not have developed under the constraints of the existing order. The Allfather's willingness to sacrifice himself in the final battle, despite his knowledge of the outcome, demonstrated his understanding that cosmic responsibility sometimes required individuals to accept personal destruction in service of larger purposes that transcended their own survival. His death would serve as the ultimate expression of the principle that leadership involved the willingness to pay any price necessary for the welfare of those under one's protection. The renewal that would follow Ragnarok would vindicate Odin's long struggle against the forces of chaos while demonstrating that his efforts to preserve cosmic order had not been futile despite their apparent failure during the final battle. The new world that would emerge from the destruction would incorporate the lessons learned through the previous cosmos's experience, while avoiding the fundamental flaws and conflicts that had made the apocalypse inevitable. The gods who survived to govern this renewed reality would possess the wisdom gained through witnessing the ultimate consequences of cosmic imbalance, enabling them to establish more sustainable patterns of divine governance that could endure for longer periods without requiring catastrophic renewal. The memory of Odin's sacrifice would serve as an inspiration for future generations of gods and mortals who would face their own challenges and crises, demonstrating that even the most powerful beings must sometimes accept defeat in service of principles larger than their own survival. His example would establish precedents for cosmic leadership that emphasized wisdom over mere strength, strategic thinking over impulsive action, and willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the greater good of universal stability. The stories of his adventures, his pursuit of knowledge, and his ultimate fate would become foundational myths that would guide the moral and spiritual development of the renewed cosmos. Thus, the Allfather's legacy would transcend his physical destruction during Ragnarok, living on through the wisdom he had preserved, the traditions he had established, and the example he had set for future cosmic leaders. His death would mark not the end of his influence, but rather its transformation from active governance to inspirational memory, ensuring that the principles and values he had championed would continue to shape cosmic development long after his individual existence had ended. The cyclical nature of Norse cosmology guaranteed that his story would be remembered and retold, providing guidance and inspiration for countless future generations who would face their own struggles against the eternal forces of chaos and destruction that threatened cosmic order throughout all ages of existence.